And the loss of life that's taking place down there is just incredible and is going to strain the emergency services of this city to the hilt.
Are you hearing any specific information? Are you hearing anything about the number of injuries, the number of fatalities, the number of people in that building, those buildings? Are you getting any of that information from
I know there
colleagues?
I know there are 50,000 people who work in the World Trade Center. I know that every ambulance and every fire company in the city and has been called in and dispatched there. It's unimaginable, but the loss of life is going to be huge.
You're as familiar with the city's plan or plans for these kinds of incidents as anyone in the city. In all honesty, does the plan cover the scope of what appears to have happened here?
No, we have an Office of Emergency Management. The plans for responding to a disaster are probably as good as any in the world, but nobody ever would contemplate that we would lose the two World Trade Centers and in this manner.
Tell me what's happening there, would you guess, in the sense that what are police doing? What's the first thing that has to happen? Triage?
The first thing is triage. The first thing is to identify who can be treated, who cannot be treated, to get those ambulances to hospitals. Every hospital's emergency room is open and I'm sure working right now. And this is just a situation, it's like a war zone. And you have to logistically treat it like a war zone. You have to have your front lines, you have to have your support, and you have to have people who are constantly in there doing something. I was also fire commissioner before I was police commissioner, and it's no longer an issue, unfortunately, but a high-rise fire like that is almost impossible to fight.
At this point, would you say that every police officer, and there are what, 40,000?
We have 41,000 police officers.
Police officers in the city have been called in?
Oh, every one of them. I know every firefighter has been called in.
And how many firefighters?
There are 14,000 firefighters, and I'm sure we'll be getting help with equipment from our adjoining communities as well. I mean, this is a logistical exercise that makes the first attack on the World Trade Center, relatively small.
Because of its scope.
Because of its scope.
And its place in the building itself, that it was high up in the building. Does that complicate things?
It does. Once you get above the 10th floor in a fire, it's almost impossible to fight a high-rise fire above the 10th floor, except by sending firefighters up there and using hose stands. Then you run into water pressure problems. I was just thinking about this not long after the World Trade Center bombing. The engineer who designed the World Trade Center told me that the World Trade Center was designed to withstand a 707 direct impact. Well, obviously, that wasn't the case.
It seems not. We are getting reports, and we are getting lots of reports, and we want to be careful to tell you when we have confirmed them and not. But we have a report that a 747 is down in Pennsylvania, and that remains unconfirmed at this point, and so we will check on that. I want to get back to the former commissioner in a moment, but again, to briefly recap, you have buildings in Washington now evacuated, the White House, the Pentagon. We have a report that there has been a collapse at part of the Pentagon itself. There was an explosion. You can see the Pentagon on the right side of your screen, and that is a live picture as well. On the left side of your screen, you see the situation here in Lower Manhattan in New York, where both of the World Trade Center towers have collapsed. This morning, as people were coming to work, all airports in the country have been shut down. International flights that were heading this way are being diverted to Canada. The White House has been evacuated. The president was in Florida this morning, and he spoke briefly and said, in truth, the kinds of things, and about the only kinds of things you can say in moments like this, that the government will do everything it can to hunt down whoever is responsible. This is obviously an extraordinary crisis for the president, and the first crisis, major crisis like it, that he has had to face, compared to the plane that was the force down in China. That seems small right now compared to what's going on here in New York and in Washington, and the president is headed back on Air Force One from Florida to the White House. The White House itself has been evacuated. We are trying now to figure out where the relevant players in Washington are, where the vice president is, the national security team, where they are meeting. We are working very hard right now to find out what both the FBI, what the CIA, what the Secret Service knows. It is chaotic now in 2 cities. You have major buildings that have been evacuated. It's very difficult, obviously, to get phone calls through as you look at the Pentagon. And I suspect we are also getting a report as you look at these pictures of the Pentagon, and I, in all honesty, suspect you see them a little more clearly than I do, but part of the building appears to me, as I look at it, to have collapsed. That's the Pentagon, and those pictures are live at 10:40 Eastern Time this morning. We have a report now of a 4th explosion at the Trade Center, and Brian Palmer, CNN correspondent, is as close as he can get to the area. Brian, what can you tell us?
We are, in fact, as close as we can get. I'm not going to give you an exact time frame, but several minutes ago we were standing in front of the United States courthouse when we saw the 2nd World Trade Center disappear from the skyline. It collapsed before our eyes, again, in a plume of ash and debris. People rushed north. We had a New York City Police Department officer here with us who witnessed the first collapse, but he actually had to dash off to duty. We've been watching people crying. Some people had relatives in the buildings. They are not sure whether they are whether they've been evacuated, removed for the buildings, or not.
Was there, Brian, did it sound like there was an explosion before the 2nd collapse, or was the noise the collapse itself?
Well, from our distance, I was not able to distinguish between an explosion and the collapse. We were several hundred yards away, but we clearly saw the building come down. I heard your report of a 4th explosion. I can't confirm that, but we heard some boom, and then the building fold in on itself.
We are told, Brian, hang on, we're told that the Secretary of Defense is being evacuated from the Pentagon. The Pentagon, a portion of the Pentagon has collapsed after, and I'm not precisely sure on this, and I want to tell you when I'm not precisely sure, but apparently a plane or helicopter hit part of the Pentagon itself. As you take a look at the pictures there, I must say every time we hear a plane coming up overhead, it gets a little nervous where we are. Whatever is happening and whoever is responsible, we have no way of knowing if it's played out yet or if it's just going on. So every time we hear a plane go by, we wonder what the situation is and where it is headed. That sound, we're told by a person here, they believe that is a fighter jet. Federal office buildings around the country, is that correct? All over the country have been closed, or just in Washington?
Well, we were not allowed into the federal courthouse here where CNN maintains a workspace. The officers just said, we're not allowing you in. I think that's a security precaution.
Got it. Stay with me a little bit. All federal office buildings now, all federal office buildings in Washington, D.C. Are being evacuated as we speak to you now. There are a variety of reports, and it's important to try and put this in some kind of order, but the most important things to tell you if you're just joined in is that what has all the makings of an extraordinarily well-planned terrorist attack on both Washington and New York has taken place this morning. The trade centers here in New York, the 2 World Trade Center towers have collapsed after being hit by a plane. Maria Hinojosa joins us on the phone. She is in New York, down near the building. Maria, what can you tell us?
Well, I'm actually at St. Vincent's Hospital right now, where at about 40 to 45 minutes after the first explosion, they started seeing patients here. What I'm hearing, and I have not been in the ER yet, is that they have at least 100 patients or more, that several of those people were dealing with issues of smoke inhalation, many of them throwing up, that there were several people who went directly to the operating room who are in very critical condition. Outside the hospital, people are coming in trying to help, to donate blood. Essentially, everybody here at this hospital is in a state of shock. I mean, I walked into the testing area, and the women here who usually just draw blood are also extraordinarily moved and shocked. They're moving in and out of the emergency room to try to help as many people as possible. Now, outside a block, about a block away from here, where you really had a bird's eye view of the two twin towers, which are the landmarks of New York City, the people stopped, the entire traffic has stopped. People have poured out of buildings and were watching, in fact, as one of the towers collapsed. And then you're really seeing a lot of people trying to move north, away from any place downtown near the World Trade Center area. People are just walking. The subways are stopped entirely all around the area of the World Trade Center. You can't get below 14th Street, and there just feels to be like a massive exodus of people walking north to get away from the area as far away as they possibly can.
Maria, I know Kitty Pilgrim is with you as well.
Right, I'm right
Kitty,
here.
Tell us what you've been able to report on.
I'm actually reporting from Kennedy Airport at the United Terminal, and I was here this morning flying out when they made an announcement about 20 of 10 that all flights were grounded. People thought it was just the normal course of airport business these days, and so there was not much of a reaction, and then the news started to trickle through. It was not an official announcement made over the intercom.
Kitty, let me interrupt for just a second. The Associated Press is reporting that federal officials fear that a second hijacked plane or another hijacked plane is headed towards the Pentagon, and I'm looking for the time on this. We will continue to check that out. Kitty, I apologize for interrupting. Why don't you continue? Did we lose her?
Everyone didn't react, but then the news came through. I have never seen Kennedy in this condition. I've been here many times. People are in absolute shock. No one's talking. They were just staring at each other with their arms dropped to their sides. A pin could drop in the United Terminal. There were a couple hundred people there, and no one was saying anything. After about 20 minutes, people rushed to the phones. You cannot phone out. There's no real access back to the city. People are trying to get back. They've unloaded the baggage from the planes. They've asked that everyone pick up their bag and take it out of the terminal and take it home. And they're asking everyone to please leave. People are just finding it difficult to leave. They are not officially evacuating Kennedy Airport at this point, at least at the United Terminal. The attendants have been asked to stay. And again, there's still several hundred people standing around not knowing what to do. No one's even speaking.
And again, for people, Kitty, thank you, not familiar with New York, Kennedy is the major airport handling international flights into the city. It is also an enormous complex of 7 or 8 or 9 terminals.
That's exactly right. And in fact, the baggage has been unloaded into a separate terminal from where I am, and they're asking people to walk over, pick up their bags, and take them out. It's virtually impossible to get from place to place at Kennedy, and of course, bridges and tunnels into Manhattan are inaccessible at this point. No one has anywhere to go.
Kitty, thank you. And we'll get back to you. Chris Plant at the Pentagon has more. He joins us on the phone. Chris, what can you tell us?
Hi, this is Chris Plant at the Pentagon.
Go
Can
ahead.
you hear me?
Yes. Chris, we hear you. Go ahead.
All right. The area to the west of the Pentagon has been evacuated further back by law enforcement and military officials as they anticipate a second aircraft arriving at the Pentagon. It's been deemed to be threatening enough where I saw at least one F-16 fighter jet in the air over the Pentagon headed to the west where the plane was reportedly coming in from. Again, they're saying here that a second aircraft is expected to arrive at the Pentagon sometime soon. They take it seriously enough that they have scrambled at least one fighter jet that I saw, probably either from the D.C. Air National Guard or the Maryland Air National Guard, both of which fly F-16s. The west front of the building of the Pentagon along Route 27 has now partially collapsed. About a 60-foot section of the building laterally has collapsed the entire 5 stories. The building is obviously, the fire is traveling inward in the building toward the courtyard, and this wedge, as they call it, of the Pentagon, the westernmost wedge,
Chris,
which was just refurbished and was in fact reinforced for terrorist attack and for just this sort of thing. I know that there were a significant number of injuries. I'm unaware of any numbers on fatalities at this point. People here who came from the building are suggesting that surely there were fatalities, but no one could confirm any. I have spoken to a number of people that I know who pulled people out of rubble. There were severe injuries. There are a number of helicopters here evacuating injured people, and I am told by one senior military source that the plane in the side of the building has been tentatively identified as a Boeing 767, a full-sized airliner, Boeing 767. But that at this point they're waiting for the arrival of a possible second plane, which has been deemed to be a threat, and as I said, fighter jets have been scrambled to address that matter.
Chris, stay with us. That's extraordinary bit of information coming out of Washington now. Let me add to something that we said earlier. We have a report now that a large plane crashed this morning north of the Somerset County Airport, which is in western Pennsylvania, not too terribly far from Pittsburgh, about 80 miles or so. Boeing 767 jet, don't know whose airline it was, whose airplane it was, and we don't have any details beyond that which I have just given you. We don't know if this is somehow connected to what has gone on in New York and Washington, but we do know that another plane has crashed, this one about 80 miles south of Pittsburgh, or at least to the southeast of Pittsburgh. Rose Arce, one of our producers here in New York, joins us on the phone. Rose, what do you have that's new?
Yes, just a while ago, I think you saw that collapse of the top of the World Trade Center. Well, it looks like a large chunk of that debris has hit a building very close by, about 2 blocks away next to an elementary school, causing another explosion. So for the last few minutes, I've been watching people running from that direction. There was one man, I'm not child, but you saw on the street. I've seen several emergency service workers carrying other emergency service workers from the scene. There's a haze everywhere. It's very, very difficult to see, but there has been the whole area has been covered by soot and ash. So it looks almost like snow. So as people are coming up the street running from the scene of this new explosion, you can see them slipping on the ash and literally having to drag each other up the street. There's an incredible amount of panic down here in downtown Manhattan as people are realizing that they really need to leave the area entirely after spending the last hour or so just watching this from afar.
Rose, stay with us. Terrific work. Let me throw another couple of pieces of information out as we continue to put this all together into a straight line if we can. The United Nations has been evacuated. The United Nations building on the east side of Manhattan has been evacuated. The city is in, this is election day, a primary election for mayor and city council races here in New York. That election has been postponed until further notice. Obviously, we are in the middle of an extraordinary catastrophe that started about 8:45 Eastern Time here in New York when one plane crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center. About a half an hour after that, as people were converging, as fire and police and rescue teams were converging on the scene, a second plane appeared to the west of the Trade Center buildings and slammed into the second tower. That's what you just saw. Fire shooting out the north and east side of the tower. Shortly after that, we began to get reports of events taking place in Washington. An explosion which first came to us as a fire at the Pentagon. Now there's a report of a second hijacked plane heading towards the Pentagon. It is believed that one of the planes, perhaps both, but one of them, we have been told, was an American Airlines 767 that hit one of the Trade Center towers. About a half an hour after that, perhaps a little bit longer, lose track of time a little bit in these situations, the first tower, or let me correct that, the south tower, the second tower, the one to the left, collapsed. It collapsed in a cascade of smoke and spark, and what we cannot tell you is if there was a second explosion that caused that collapse, or if it was simply, that's the first one, that's the south tower collapsing, and that was about a half hour, give or take, after the planes hit the tower. Then shortly after that, just as the smoke was starting to clear away, the second tower, and that's what you're looking at now. Again, this was not very long ago, 10, 15 minutes ago, the second tower, it almost looks like one of those implosions of buildings that you see, except there is nothing controlled about this. This is devastation. How many people? There are 50,000 people who normally go to work in the Trade Center buildings. How many of those people had arrived already? How many of those people were trapped in the upper stories? How many of those people have been hurt? How many of those people died? We cannot tell you now. We can tell you that hospitals throughout the New York area are receiving literally hundreds of patients. And they are performing triage. They are trying to figure out who could be treated, who needs help first. This is sort of standard operating procedure. We are just being told now that Israel has evacuated all its diplomatic missions around the world. Israel has evacuated its missions. We are told now that Yasser Arafat has condemned these attacks, and we don't know yet who's behind them. Britain has condemned these attacks. Germany has convened its National Security Council, and we will check and see if events are going on in those places or if that is simply a reaction to what has gone on here in Washington and in New York. CNN's Gene Meserve joins us on the phone from Washington. Gene.
Hay Street, which is one of the major thoroughfares here in Washington, it is absolute gridlock. It takes about 15 minutes to drive one block. Ordinarily, this time of day, there'd be nothing near this kind of traffic. You see pedestrians filling the sidewalks, many of the businesses and offices here having closed. You see cars absolutely pouring out of the parking lots, contributing to the absolutely horrendous traffic situation. Many people trying to use their cell phones. However, cell phone service has become very difficult in this town because of the crush on circuits. For the most part, people appear to be very calm and collected. I will tell you, though, that as I drove, I looked at the car next to me full of some young women who I would guess were in their 20s, several of them crying their eyes out, obviously very upset as they listened to the radio and heard the news of what is happening in this city in New York also. Aaron, back to you.
Gene, thanks. Gene Meserve in Washington this morning as she and the rest of the organization continues to gather what facts we can, what facts are available in the wake of the extraordinary chaos that has followed this extraordinarily horrendous terrorist attack. American Airlines, we are told, one of the planes involved in this was a hijacked American Airlines 767 out of Logan Airport in Boston. American Airlines will say what is known. What is known as you look at the White House being evacuated a short time ago, or is that live? And I'm not sure on my monitor which it is. I believe it's taped from a short time ago. In any case, American Airlines will talk to reporters in about a half hour or so, 11:30 Eastern Time. One of its planes involved in this, and we will bring that press conference to you live when it happens. Here in New York, hospitals are being overwhelmed. As hundreds of patients are being brought in and being treated. We cannot tell you, we would not even begin to guess what the numbers in this will be, how many people will have died by the time this day is over, how many injuries have taken place in both Washington and New York. But as former police commissioner Howard Safer told us a few moments ago, obviously the numbers are going to be extraordinary. Who do we have on the phone, guys? Just help me out here. Patty, are you there?
Yes, I am here.
What do you got?
About an hour ago, I was on the corner of Broadway and Park Place. That's about 1,000 yards from the World Trade Center. When the first tower collapsed, it was a massive explosion. At the time, the police were trying desperately to evacuate people from the area. When that explosion occurred, it was like the scene out of a horror film. People started stampeding away from it.
Patty, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. We told you there was a second plane that went down, this one around 80 miles or so southeast of Pittsburgh. We'll try now to connect with KDKA TV in Pittsburgh. Well, just so much for planning. We will try again. Again, we have reports that a plane has crashed in the Pittsburgh area, southeast of Pittsburgh, about 80 miles. And at varying times, we've heard that this was a 767 and a 747. I'm not sure it matters which it is. What matters is that a plane has crashed in the Pittsburgh area. The Pentagon continues to monitor reports that another plane, a hijacked plane, is headed for that area. All flights have been canceled around the country. International flights heading towards the United States are being diverted into Canada this morning. Patty, let me go back to you as we look at some tape from the ground. Patty, why don't you go ahead and continue?
Okay, Aaron, I'm in the main building of Pace University, which is inside the fallout zone of all the debris from the two building collapses. At the time of the first building collapse, I was at Broadway and Park Place. There was a huge cloud of smoke. It overcame the crowd. People were stampeding. Literally, the debris was so thick you could not see your hand in front of your face. I ducked around onto a building that was on Park Place and Beekman Street. When I was in there, people were coming in, they were crying, they were wailing. You couldn't see anything outside. After the smoke had cleared a little bit, I came outside. The scene was like a ghost town in the financial district, very eerie. You saw people being wheeled on gurneys away from the site of the explosion. People were coming out with masks over their face, anything they could put over their face, because the air was still very thick with debris. The ash on the ground is at least 2 inches thick. It's more like snow cover, a very eerie snow cover blanketing downtown Manhattan right now. Now, at the time, I was back on the corner again of Broadway and Park Place. At that time, the police started running toward us, telling everybody to move who was left on the street. I looked up, and that's when I heard the, pardon me, that's when I heard the explosion. That's when the second tower came down. Again, whoever was left on the street started stampeding. I'm in the office. Right now, I'm in the main building of Pace University. People are crying. They have gas masks on their face. Authorities are making people go toward the basement. They're just doing anything that they can to move people away from the financial district. But again, it is a very horrifying scene down here, very eerie, like a ghost town.
Patty, let me interrupt you. Mayor Giuliani is on the telephone, is part of New York One's coverage. We join our affiliate for that.
Mayor Giuliani, since we have New Yorkers listening, and obviously their thoughts are with the people who are down there.
Urge them to remain calm, to remain at home, or to remain at their place of business, unless they're in Lower Manhattan. By that I mean south of Canal Street. If you're south of Canal Street, get out, walk, and walk slowly, carefully. There are plenty of police around, but just walk directly. If you can't figure out what else to do, just walk directly north. That'll get you out of the dangerous smoke area. It'll also do us a big favor. It'll open up those streets, because we're going to be moving a large number of ambulances and emergency personnel in and out of there all day. I've talked to the governor. He is putting the National Guard on alert so that they can relieve our police officers and our firefighters later this afternoon. And we've asked the federal government for help from the Urban Search and Rescue Team. So right now, we're using all of our police and firefighters and emergency personnel to help the people down there. Later on, we're probably going to need reinforcements.
Mayor Giuliani, I realize that it must be more than a chaotic situation, particularly since the bunker has been compromised and cordoned off. But can you give us any sense? There are so many people watching now who must have loved ones down in that area and are concerned of the systematic...
My heart goes out to them. I've never seen anything like this. I was there from shortly after it happened and saw people jumping out of the World Trade Center. It's a horrible, horrible situation. And all that I can tell them is that every resource that we have is attempting to rescue as many people as possible. And the end result is going to be some horrendous number of lives lost. I don't think we know yet. But right now, we have to just focus on saving as many people as possible.
Can you give us a sense of if there is, in fact, some system being implemented, what that system is, and where people are being taken?
People are triaging. People are being taken to every area hospital possible, even virtually within minutes. I drove down right past St. Vincent's Hospital, and I could see them actually on the street ready to take people, and that was within minutes of the first airplane hitting the World Trade Center. So the hospitals are ready. We'll be moving them to all different area hospitals, triaging them. The main thing is having those streets open so that we can get people in and out of the southern part of Manhattan as quickly as possible, so that we can move them, to hospitals all over the city.
And Mayor Giuliani, we'll let you...
in place. They're doing it. We just need the cooperation of people in getting out of there.
We'll let you get back to the operations there, and we do appreciate you taking the time for us here.
But once again, the only thing to do now is to remain calm and try to assist in the rescue effort.
Thank you.
Now let's pray.
That's New York's Mayor Rudy Giuliani talking to a CNN affiliate New York One here, saying that clearly there's going to be tremendous number of lives lost. on these attacks here in New York, urging people to stay calm and to leave the area calmly. The area is in the southern part of Manhattan, way down on the tip of Manhattan Island. The mayor urging people to calmly move north. CNN's Jamie McIntyre is at the Pentagon. Jamie, why don't you start, if you can, at the beginning here as we try and put some order to all of this. What happened?
Well, let me just describe the scene that we have here, and I'll back up a little bit. But right now I'm looking at the charred facade of the Pentagon, a huge gaping hole on the side where the Pentagon heliport is located, the side that faces Arlington Cemetery. In front of me is a long line of rescue personnel with backboards. They're just waiting for victims to be brought out so they can rush them to nearby medical facilities. I see a few victims being treated on the grass outside the Pentagon. Firefighters continue to pour streams of water onto the side of the building, and huge black cloud of smoke continues to billow out. It is a scene of utter destruction here. I'm sure it pales in comparison to the World Trade Center, but I've never seen anything like this myself in the history of the Pentagon. There's been nothing like this. Again, a huge gaping hole. You can see the exposed 5 floors of the Pentagon offices just ripped apart. Our report is that an aircraft of some kind, and at least one witness identified it as a civilian aircraft, hit the side of the building shortly after the incident in the World Trade Center this morning. People who were in their offices nearby reported hearing a huge explosion, seeing shards of shrapnel come by their window. The entire Pentagon has been evacuated. A short time after this attack, there were urgent announcements made over the loudspeaker telling people to quickly get away from the building because they had reports of a second plane heading this way just 2 minutes away. F-16 jets were scrambled over the Pentagon. I saw several of them go by, but no second plane ever materialized, and the building remained completely evacuated as firefighters continue to pour columns of water on the devastated side of the Pentagon, and rescue personnel continue to whisk victims away. We have no report at this time of how many casualties. Clearly, dozens and dozens of people have been hurt, and we presume that there have been some deaths as well. It's hard to imagine otherwise, considering the extent of damage at the side of the building. And I can see just some of the windows side, a stretch of the building, perhaps 40 or 50 feet wide. Just looks like it has collapsed under the weight of the impact. Aaron?
We're going to briefly interrupt this extraordinary CNN coverage. We are trying to get through to the Prime Minister, John Howard. We're trying to get through to our ambassador in the United States. As soon as we have any word of Mr. Howard's whereabouts, as soon as we have any word of he and his entourage, we'll bring it to you. In the meantime, we have one of our former reporters, Prue Clark, an ABC reporter, former ABC reporter, now living in New York and working for the Financial Times. Prue, can you tell us where you are and what you've seen this morning?
I'm just in the West Village, which is, probably 10, 15 blocks up from the World Trade Center. I heard it sort of as I was leaving for work at about 10 minutes to 9 that there'd been an incident. I walked outside and there were just, as you would have seen, just 2 gaping holes, one in the North Tower of the World Trade Center. I walked down the street. It was literally sort of 10 minutes away from me. On the way, I'd heard that another plane had crashed into the tower. I didn't see either of these things. I got within a block of the World Trade Center, and there were people running away, screaming, tears streaming down their face, people coming the other way who obviously had relatives screaming no, absolute pandemonium. The police had very little idea of, very little sort of control at that point. I walked within a block, glass and debris just all over the block, all over cars, everything. Police are trying to get people away. We were standing watching, just not knowing what was going on. I really had no idea that the tower was going to collapse. And then suddenly this thunderous roar, and the building began to collapse. And I was probably 3 blocks away, up Broadway from the building at that point. It just started collapsing. People started screaming and running, and it was an absolute stampede. I saw people getting pushed over, and then we just stood and watched, probably 6 blocks away by this point. Police still trying to herd people further up the street, and people were just standing there in shock and disbelief, and again, scenes of crying and mayhem. And then, as we're watching, just these unbelievable scenes of people jumping out of the building. On about the 80th floor, just in those three or four floors that you could see that were alight, people were jumping to their death, presumably. It was an absolutely horrifying scene.
Prue, where are you now?
Well, there was just no telephone coverage at all in the area, and I understand some of the television stations were knocked out as well because the World Trade Center had major telephone and television coverage antennas from the top of it. There was no coverage whatsoever, so I moved back up home, which is in the West Village, about 15 blocks from the Trade Center.
Prue, we can assume you were on your way to work. We can assume that many thousands of people probably were in these two buildings, which now have both collapsed.
Yeah. I mean, I would imagine there were thousands, and in the buildings around as well, because they would have, I would think, would have been underneath the towers as they collapsed. I mean, who knows how many got out? I had heard reports that it was quite orderly after the first crash, when the plane crashed, then the second plane crashed, and people, it got kind of out of control, and people were running outside and running over each other. But there's just no way of knowing. I've heard people have spoken to the emergency services people, and they just say there's just no way of knowing how many casualties there'll be at this time. But people are talking thousands.
Can you give us some sense of how the people around you, at least, are responding to this?
People are just in absolute shock. I've heard people have come out of the subways, that people aren't standing in buildings because they're afraid that they're going to collapse. At one point, a fighter jet came overhead, and obviously there's been a massive kind of military reaction at this point, and people were terrified that it was another plane and sort of running for cover and screaming. Just every minute something's happening, and people are running and screaming and in chaos. But when things quieten down, people are just standing there in shock. A lot of people crying, trying to get to telephones. There are, lines 20 deep next to payphones, but it's just absolute chaos.
Are you aware, and are the people around you aware of what's happening in the rest of the country, in Washington, for example, where the Pentagon has had a hijacked plane crash into it, in other cities? Also, Pennsylvania, another plane has gone down just south of Pittsburgh.
Yeah, look, I was hearing that, but most people in New York weren't. The people that I was seeing were on the street. They were just immediately concerned with what was happening here. Stories were sort of filtering out that it was terrorist attacks. And I think their reaction, getting out of the subway closed eventually, but people were, just terrified that this was just the start. And that's kind of the feeling at this point, I think.
Okay, Prue, we're going to leave you there. We're going to go back to Washington now, to our correspondent Jim Middleton, who's, I don't think we have quite got him yet. I think we'll go back to the CNN coverage.
Yeah, great.
Well, it is hard, isn't it? I mean, you look out here, and you see the Statue of Liberty to the right, and these buildings off to the left. The attacks on Washington, we don't know a lot about who's behind this or what this is all about, but the symbolism of these attacks is extraordinary. CNN's David Ensor is in Washington, and he joins us. David?
Aaron, I'm talking to U.S. officials who are obviously working on who is responsible for this. Their working thesis is that this is overseas terrorism, not domestic. They say they cannot rule out additional attacks yet to come. In terms of claims of responsibility so far, there is an Agence France-Presse report in which a group with the word Palestine in the name claims responsibility. There is also a report quoting personnel close to Osama bin Laden, the fugitive Saudi accused terrorist, denying that group was involved. But again, U.S. officials say they can't shed any light on whether these reports are correct or incorrect. Usually when this kind of attack occurs, you have claims of responsibility from all sorts of people who had nothing to do with it. So it's a very fluid situation at this point. But the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States has been evacuated from its headquarters in Langley, Virginia. There are some key personnel still in the headquarters, but the operations center has been moved elsewhere. U.S. officials saying they don't want to talk about where exactly the headquarters staff and operations staff has been moved to. But that staff is focusing now on trying to find any shred of information that could help the U.S. government figure out who is doing this and how to put a stop to it. Aaron?
David, you tell me if I'm right or wrong here, as a practical matter, there are not a whole lot of groups that the United States government knows about that are sophisticated enough, have the kind of money, the resources to pull off something like this. Fair enough?
That's absolutely true, and obviously, despite the denial, attention will quickly turn to the bin Laden group because it has long tentacles. It has connections with all sorts of other groups. We saw at the Millennium a group of Algerians apparently involved in trying to arrange bombings in the United States, and now there is evidence being produced in court sessions that those Algerians were working for the bin Laden group. So that group certainly will come under immediate suspicion. There are very few others that could have pulled this off.
Jim Middleton is, I think, on the line now, our correspondent in Washington. We're going to briefly break in once again to this CNN coverage for some news from Jim. Jim, have you any word at all on where the Prime Minister is now, where Mr. Howard is?
I believe the Prime Minister is still at the Willard Hotel, which is about 3 blocks from the White House, where he's been staying under Secret Service protection, United States Secret Service protection. He was due to address the United States Chamber of Commerce today in a couple of hours, or in about an hour from now. I very much doubt that that's going to happen. He was also due to go to Arlington, the Arlington War Cemetery this afternoon, Washington time, to lay wreaths and pay his respects. I'd be very surprised if that occurs. And indeed, he was due to go to New York in 2 days' time for some business meetings before returning to Australia. That is very much up in the air. We did question the Prime Minister earlier on today. In fact, he was holding a news conference at the very time the plane went into the Pentagon, and you could see it through the window behind him. He described what had happened in New York, which is all that he knew about at that stage, with the World Trade Center, as a terrible tragedy. And when we asked him whether his travel plans would change, he said, that all pales into insignificance by comparison with what's happened with the loss of life and so on and so forth in America.
Jim, it clearly does. That's obviously true. We, however, have been trying to reach the Prime Minister at his hotel. We've had no word. We can't get through on any of the phones to the hotel.
Well, the phones throughout the whole Washington area are in a very poor shape indeed. Very few of them are working. Mobile phones are a dodgy proposition. Whether that's simply because of overloading due to all the traffic that's been brought about by this terrible tragedy, this panic and so on and so forth, I'm not sure. But I haven't been able to get through to the Prime Minister's office either, and I haven't left the ABC office to find out.
Jim, we've just heard some horrific eyewitness accounts of what's been going on in New York. What can you tell us about what you've seen in Washington?
In Washington, it wasn't so much panic, it was very grim-faced. As soon as the Pentagon came on fire, they started evacuating all the government buildings, including the White House, the State Department, the Treasury building, and Capitol Hill. And right where I am, which is about 3 blocks from the White House, and a police cordon was set up immediately. Sharpshooters were in Lafayette Park, just across the road from the White House. There's gridlock in the streets. I'm not sure if I look out the window now, it's still not really moving at all. There's a little bit of movement. People were very grim-faced, shaking their heads, could not believe what was going on. The other thing that was happening was many people were concerned for their children, because this happened at around about 9 o'clock in the morning, Washington time. Their children were in schools or daycare centres. People were not able to get in contact with them, and so there's a great deal of concern, but not the kind of panic that we saw in the vicinity of the World Trade Center in New York.
Jim, not so long ago on CNN, they reported that a car bomb had exploded outside the State Department. They haven't come back to any news on that at all. Have you got anything?
I haven't heard anything further on that matter, no, and I don't know whether that is true or not at this stage. The other thing, of course, that we have heard is about this plane crash in Pennsylvania of a 767, I believe. Now, whether that was intended to head towards Washington, because Pennsylvania is not that far away, I'm not sure, but that's the only other fact or information that I have at this stage. But I can't confirm whether or not the report of the car bomb at the State Department is indeed correct. There have been quotes from police officials here saying that something has happened at the State Department, but they're not sure what it was.
Jim, you're an old Washington correspondent. Both of us have lived in that city. The United States and the world have seen terrorist attacks before, but nothing like this. This is closer to war.
This is quite extraordinary. A coordinated set of attacks, obviously coordinated set of attacks on major focal points in the United States of this kind is something that's not at all within my experience. Now, the World Trade Center was the focus for some activity I recall back in the 1980s. I can't now remember exactly what, but we haven't seen anything of this kind where terrorists have been able to pierce the fairly fierce and well-organised American security cordon to get into the Pentagon is remarkable. I mean, these are kamikaze attacks, obviously, and something that no one could have predicted or indeed take precautions against. It's very hard to stop a hijacked plane heading anywhere unless you blast it out of the sky, and it all happened within the space of about an hour, so it would have been very difficult to take any kind of precautionary action at all. The United States has been a target for terrorist activity right through the last 20 or 30 years, but usually it's been American bases, say, in Lebanon or embassies in Kenya, for example. I've never seen, this has been brought home to Americans in the most graphic way possible, what it is to be a superpower, what it is to face a terrorist attack. It's not the kind of thing that they're used to, and it's a very difficult thing for the authorities to deal with.
Jim, the President, we believe, is in the air on Air Force One at the moment. He's got his own control centre on Air Force One, but do we know who's actually in overall control of the country at the moment?
Well, the President is in control. That's the way it is. The next person in command would be the Vice President, but the President, who was campaigning in Florida yesterday and due to continue there today, is flying back from, I believe, Sarasota, Florida to Washington. He would have his command centre. If anything were to go wrong, the next person in charge is the Vice President.
OK, Jim, we're going to leave it there. Hopefully we'll be able to get on to the Prime Minister shortly. And we'll come back to the CNN coverage for the time being.
767 was involved in one of the hits on the Trade Center as well. We don't know if there's a reason why it is American and not any other. We won't speculate as to whether there is or not. We'll just tell you what the facts are as we get them, and that's what we have. American says 2 of its planes down, and I assume that is 2 other than the one that hit the Trade Center, and you guys check that out to make sure I'm right.
And we have a report of a crash in Somerset County.
Right. I believe a 767, though we're getting reports perhaps a 747, which doesn't quite fit into what we believe flies Chicago to New York, is also down as well, and I do not know the airline involved there. Let me just go back on okay, I do now. It's a United Airlines plane. So we have a number of planes down, a number of planes involved in these attacks. The Boston to Atlanta, if I'm reading the notes correctly, had an American 767 with 81 passengers down. That's American Airlines Flight 11, and American Airlines Flight 77, which is a 757 jetliner, Dulles Airport outside of Washington to Los Angeles International, with 58 passengers on board, 4 flight attendants, 2 pilots also reported down. And then there is this United Airlines jet which crashed about 80 miles to the southeast of Pittsburgh.
We should also mention, I think, Aaron, that inevitably some of these early fragmentary reports are going to be needing correction, and that will be done as soon as possible. We had a report of a second hijacked plane on the way to Washington. Capitol Police were reporting that there have been no signs of that plane. We simply, at this point in this awful story, have to just tell our viewers we will do everything we can to report this accurately. If fragmentary reports need amending or correcting, that will be done immediately.
And I think in fairness here, there is in a number of places right now, perhaps 4 or 5, chaos. And numbers that come out aren't necessarily going to hold up. And in our reporting, we will be a bit conservative on some of this until we track it down. There's no point in allowing this thing to seem worse than it is. It is already horrendous, and we don't need to make it any worse by misstating numbers. And we want you to keep that in mind. CNN Medical Unit reports that the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, the Centers for Disease Control, is preparing bioterrorism teams to respond to the incidents. This, we are told, is simply precautionary. We have absolutely no reports and no evidence that there is any biochemical or bioterrorism going on, but clearly what is happening in every department of the United States government, and I suspect in every department of most major cities right now, the plan that they hope they never have to implement, the plan that they spent years preparing, is now in effect, not just here, not just in Washington, but around the country, because no one knows precisely where this is going. CNN, my colleague Judy Woodruff joins us from Washington. Judy?
Aaron, we've been watching this here in the Washington Bureau. I'm in the studio now, just a few blocks from the Capitol, from the United States Capitol, and the first thing I want to tell you is that everyone, I'm sure, on their minds is God rest the souls of those who've lost their lives this morning in New York, in Washington, near Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania. It is just a story for which there are no words to describe. Here in Washington, we are keeping a very close watch on the Pentagon. You've been reporting, Aaron, and other CNN correspondents. A plane evidently crashed, a commercial jetliner crashed into the Pentagon earlier this morning. Approximately 60-foot section of this building, which is, of course, the headquarters of all the military for the United States, was on fire as a result of this crash, and then collapsed. These are some of the pictures we've been bringing our audience from the Pentagon. We've watched people being treated by first aid personnel there. We have no information yet on casualties, on the number of people who may have been hurt or may have died in this incident, although emergency personnel on the scene have said surely there have been casualties there. Elsewhere in Washington, every federal building has been evacuated or is in the process of being evacuated. I'm now told that United Airlines is now saying that flight, can you tell me the number of the flight? 93 has crashed in Pennsylvania. Now, a flight from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco. Now, we don't know if this is the same airplane that Aaron was reporting a little earlier crashed in Somerset County near Pittsburgh. Aaron had reported that some minutes ago, and now we are getting a confirmation from United Airlines that its flight, United 93, on the way to San Francisco, has crashed. So we now have at least two commercial airline companies in the United States, American Airlines reporting two of its passenger jets down, one flight, Dulles in Washington to Los Angeles, and then another flight from Boston to Los Angeles down, and now we have United Airlines reporting at least one airline or airliner down with concern about another one. So the pieces of this story continue to come together. I have to say, in my 30 years as a journalist, I have never seen anything like this, never covered a story of the dimensions of this, and I'm sure it's safe to say that's the case for my colleague Aaron Brown and for any one of the other many correspondents, producers, and others with CNN and our colleagues at the other news networks. And I would just remind you that CNN right now has producers, correspondents all around the world who are watching for any more information that we can bring you at this point. As Aaron and Jeff Greenfield have been saying in the last few minutes, everything we have right now is fragmentary. We are simply reporting to you what we are learning from police, from the federal government, from the CIA, from David Ensor, from our other correspondents. And I'm now told that former U.S. Army Commander General Wesley Clark is joining us on the telephone. Former commander of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is joining us from Little Rock, Arkansas. General Clark, from your knowledge of the military, you know the Pentagon. What are you thinking right now?
Well, good morning, Judy. First of all, we've got to try to assess what's really happening, and as all of the news reports indicate, it's clearly a coordinated effort. It wasn't announced, and it hasn't been announced that it's over, and we don't know how it will finally conclude, so there's likely to be more trouble before all of this concludes. So we've got to protect the American people first. We've got to look after those who are injured. We've got to take precautionary measures to deal with future incidents. And I think all of that's underway with a lot of responsible action by people everywhere. The damage at the Pentagon is unclear from all the news reports that I've seen. The one report that said it crashed into the Army side of the building. There are command centers in various places of the Pentagon, and there are many other alternate command centers. So I don't think there's really any issue about the command and control of the United States Armed Forces. I'm sure that's very solid right now.
General Clark, why do you say there's likely to be more trouble?
Well, we're hearing still reports of aircraft that are out there. There's no way of knowing when all of the possible incidents have either taken place or been aborted by whoever it is that's behind this. And so we have to be ready for whatever might happen next.
General, can you give us some sense of, clearly the United States has never experienced anything of this magnitude, but what are the leaders of our military, the Joint Chiefs, the Secretary of Defense and others, what presumably are they doing right now in order to be on top of a situation where you have the Pentagon on fire, New York City in a state of chaos, and every federal building in Washington evacuated?
Well, first of all, we'll be trying to assess what happened. We'll be making sure that the protection posture of our bases worldwide and all of our units out there is raised so that we're able to protect our forces and our family members, and then we'll be looking to provide assistance to wherever such incidents might occur. Whatever military capabilities there will be that could be of use will be certainly made available to the other agencies of state, local, and federal government who are involved in trying to deal with these tragedies right now. Then beyond that, we'll be waiting for the information to come in about who may have been behind this, and we'll be looking at what measures can be taken to strike and prevent further actions or in punitive retaliation.
Well, speaking of that, General Clark, wouldn't you agree there are very few of the terrorist groups, at least that we're familiar with, who would have the capability to pull off something this coordinated on this scale?
I think that's exactly right. There's only one group that has ever indicated that it has this kind of ability, and that's Osama bin Laden's. So obviously that'll be the first suspicion.
Clearly we are all in a state of shock, General Clark, but is it fair to say that you're not truly surprised by this, given what we've heard from that particular group? And again, we don't know who's behind this, but given what we do know.
Well, there have been many threats made against the United States and threats of terrorism, and we know that the World Trade Center has been a target. We know that aircraft have been hijacked, and we know that car bombings are used in many places in the world. And there's no doubt that for a long time there have been groups who have tried to target the United States. Normally, many times we've gotten indications. We've been able to take actions that the American public never knows about that have broken up these attempts. In this case, for whatever reason, we didn't have the information and we weren't able to take the actions to break it up.
And General, what do you say to those Americans who are looking at these horrific pictures that they've been watching now for almost 3 hours on television, who are thinking, will I ever feel safe again in an airplane, in a tall building in this country?
I think that will be one of the primary issues that has to be addressed by government leaders, is how to restore ever a sense of normalcy to the country. Will it ever be the same? And that's a question everybody will be asking. But I think it's too soon to expect any answers to that. I think we've got to assess this. We've got to track this down. I think one thing that comes through very clearly now is if this is terrorism and international terrorism, then clearly there has to be a much greater degree of cooperation between nations to deal with this. Whoever did this lives somewhere. He's supported by someone, and people know him. And someone knew that these events were being planned. And if we didn't have that information, we should have. And I think that's one resolve that will come out of this from nations all over the world, that more has to be done collectively together.
But in a large sense, General Clark, whoever was behind this has clearly succeeded in the most horrific and devastating way.
Well, it's been a tragedy for America, there's no doubt about that, and for so many people and their families, our hearts go out to them.
General, we're looking, as I'm talking with General Wesley Clark, who is a former NATO commander, he's talking to us from Arkansas. We're looking at helicopters patrolling, I believe it's the area around the Pentagon, although I can't tell by the banner across the lower part of the screen. We do know that President Bush was in Florida this morning. He abruptly cut his trip short in order, we think, to fly back to Washington. And General Clark, while you are with us, what would the plans be for the president in this situation without giving away secure information? Would the president necessarily return to Washington? Is there always a plan in place in these situations?
Well, there would have to be a plan always in place to take the president to where he can best control what's going on and monitor it and make decisions, and also where he will be safe. And you can be sure that there are plans and backup plans and alternate plans to the backup plans. There'll be no shortage of efforts underway to assure his safety and his ability to maintain the continuity of government.
And once again, just finally, General Clark, as we look at these live pictures of the Pentagon, describe for us what you know of the section of the building that evidently was hit by the commercial jetliner.
Well, that picture seems to be from the area of the bridges, the 14th Street Bridge, looking at the corner of the Pentagon that is opposite from where the strike was. So it looks like the strike hit between the 4th, 5th, maybe 6th corridors of the Pentagon. Perhaps on the Army side of the building, there are a number of offices there, administrative offices, where Army leaders and staff officers work on a daily basis. They deal with things like planning and logistics and congressional relations and public affairs in that area. And the Army leadership was probably close to where that may have impacted. There are a number of other facilities below ground, some of which have been relocated, and it's impossible to see from that picture what the condition might be there.
General Clark, any final word before we let you go?
Well, I think that we've known for some time that there were groups planning this, and I think the American people should know that the men and women in government and all the agencies have worked very hard and very diligently against this. Obviously, we didn't do enough. We didn't either have the tools or the cooperation or somehow get the information that we needed to have prevented it. And you can be sure that those men and women are right now resolved to do more and to be more effective. This is a national challenge, and I'm confident that we'll meet it.
All right, General Wesley Clark joining us now from Little Rock, Arkansas. He is, of course, the former commander of NATO. General Clark saying earlier, in his estimation, there is likely to be more trouble given the coordination and the scale of these devastating attacks this morning, September the 11th, 2001, on New York City and on Washington, D.C., and at least 4 commercial jetliners involved in these different attacks. Patty Davis, our Washington correspondent, here with me in the studio. Patty, you have some information about one of those airliners.
That's right, Judy. Well, United Airlines, as you said earlier, is confirming that its Flight 93, that's a Boeing 757, it was en route from Newark to San Francisco, did crash near Pittsburgh. It is also now saying that it is deeply concerned about another flight, that is United Flight number 175, a Boeing 757 that was traveling from Boston to Los Angeles. It said it is deeply concerned about that flight right now. We don't know the status of that particular flight right now. Now, the United Airlines CEO, James Goodwin, saying that the thoughts of everyone at United are with the passengers and crews of these flights, including prayers. United is not saying how many people on board each of these flights, how many flight attendants, how many pilots. So at this point, that is their statement. They're saying one plane. They are confirming Flight 93 that was from Newark to San Francisco crashed near Pittsburgh. Another flight deeply concerned about United Flight 175, Boston to Los Angeles. That's a Boeing 767. Now, on a typical day, there'd be some 4,000 flights of all different aircraft, including military, general aviation, commercial aircraft in the skies. As we've reported here on CNN, the FAA has issued a ground stop, the first ever on all departing flights in the United States.
All right, we're breaking into the CNN coverage again briefly for a moment to bring you some information specifically for Australians. Telstra has advised that the Department of Foreign Affairs has set up a hotline for people worried about friends and family in the United States. The number is 1300 555 135. That number again is 1300 555 135. Telstra advises that exchanges in North America are jammed and that the 1300 number is the best chance for getting updated information about Australians in the United States. And to recap on developments so far, the United States is on high alert after a series of plane crashes and suspected terrorist attacks on prominent buildings. 2 aircraft crashed within 18 minutes of each other into the World Trade Center towers in New York. Both towers have since collapsed. The US President George W. Bush says it appears to be an act of terrorism and has vowed an all-out hunt for those responsible. The FBI is investigating a possible plane hijacking ahead of the crash. Minutes after the Trade Center attack, a plane crashed into the Pentagon, engulfing that building in fire and smoke and forcing the evacuation of all staff. Capitol Hill has also been rocked by an explosion. The White House and the State Department have both been evacuated. Airports across the country have been shut down for at least 7 hours under national ground stop orders. The bridges and tunnels into Manhattan are all closed. John Howard, we have just heard, has arrived at the Australian Embassy in Washington, and we're hoping to make contact with him shortly. And world condemnation has been pouring in, as have offers of help. An Israeli rescue team is preparing to head to the United States. And alarmed by the brutality of the attack, NATO Secretary-General George Robertson has called for the evacuation of all staff from NATO headquarters in Brussels. No one has yet claimed responsibility for the attack, but Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat has condemned the attack and expressed his condolences.
First of all, I am offering my condolences, the condolences of the Palestinian people to the American President, President Bush, to his government, to the American people for this terrible act. We are completely shocked, unbelievable.
And we'll come back to you as soon as we've got more information pertinent to Australians, but we'll return you now to our CNN coverage.
Coming from that building. The first of those planes hit, and then 18 minutes later, and we can show you this one, the second tower was hit. That plane, you see it on the right side of your screen, coming behind the tower, and you will see the flame and the smoke coming from the front as that plane, perhaps a hijacked plane. We have, CNN's been told that an American Airlines flight out of Boston, a 767, was hijacked. And that was about 18 minutes after the first. Then as rescue crews began converging, as people desperately tried to get out of those buildings. Some 50,000 people work in the Trade Center towers here in Manhattan. As they were trying to get out, the South Tower collapsed. It collapsed in an enormous plume of smoke and spark. And what we can't tell you is if there was a second explosion or if this collapse was simply a structural collapse caused by the plane that hit it perhaps a half hour before. And then just a few minutes after that, it wasn't very long, as you will see, it happened again. The second tower came tumbling down, and you can see that it almost looks like one of those planned implosions, but of course there was nothing planned, and it was not an implosion, as you see.
That was the first tower collapse that we just saw.
There we go. Here's the second one coming.
This is the collapse of the second tower.
And so now as we stand here, both towers, the tops of both towers are gone. Behind somewhere, that plume of smoke that continues to rise over the Trade Center. What is left of those buildings, we cannot tell you. We cannot tell you. In Logan Airport, where at least 2, perhaps 3 of the planes involved began their day, officials now are meeting with reporters, and we can pick that up live.
That we've had various reports on to call these following numbers. American Airlines, 800-245-0999. Secondly, family members can call a Mathport number, 617-568-3100. We've also urging people not to come to the airport at this point in time. We've increased the shuttle buses from the terminals to the MBTA Blue Line stop, and the MBTA has increased the frequency of subway transportation. We are in close communication with the FAA, the FBI, State Police, Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And that's all I have right now.
So you've got to tell us.
What flights do you have reports on?
The flights, I cannot confirm or deny any flight numbers because I have not received official notification on any flight numbers.
How can we get
All in, so it'll be everybody who's got a flight.
Okay, I do believe several of the media outlets are broadcasting several flight numbers. I believe they broadcast flight number 11, American Airlines. I don't know at this point in time.
Were the passengers hijacked?
I cannot confirm that.
Has the airport accounted for all outbound flights?
That's outside of the scope of the airport's responsibility. We're leaving it up to the FAA to conduct that activity.
Joe, what is the code? Joe, what is the code Fort Knox? We have reports of employees screaming Fort Knox around the airport at the time that the planes went into the World Trade.
That I don't know what that means. Doesn't mean have any connotation here at Logan Airport.
What about planes that are flying in here? Are they being rerouted somewhere else?
Aircraft were flying into Logan Airport. We did take some arrivals, but now since the airport is shut down, these flights will be diverted to Canada.
They're not taking flights either, would you?
Are you screening passengers?
Remove them from another area, yes. They're being directed to seek either public transportation or their own transportation out of the airport. Leaving the airport? No.
How long do you anticipate the airport to be closed?
It's indefinite at this time. We'll be meeting with the FAA. We'll be conducting analysis of our intelligence that we have. We'll make a determination later on this afternoon.
What details?
Pardon me? I can just tell you briefly, we have shut down security checkpoints. We've moved everyone away from the boarding gate areas. We've increased police presence dramatically. We've requested additional state police be sent to the airport. And we've shut down some construction activities around the airport.
Is this the highest level of security ever, Joe?
Is another flight from Boston?
I can't confirm or deny that right now.
Was there anything unusual about the boarding procedure of this flight?
I don't have any reports that would say same.
Are you investigating breaches of security? How are you getting to the bottom of this hijacking?
I can tell you we have an ongoing investigation right now. Just an initial investigation being conducted with Massport, Massachusetts State Police, and the FBI.
What do you know about United Airlines Flight 175, which is unaccounted for right now from out of Boston?
I don't have any, can't confirm or anything or deny anything on that. That's
Joe,
the flight.
got a number?
No, they have not.
Joe, did Flight 11 leave on time? Were there any delays? And was there any conversation between the pilot and the tower that seemed unusual?
Flight number 11 left at 7:59. I believe it was on time. And everything went as scheduled when it left Logan Airport.
How many people were on board?
I don't have a passenger count right now.
Are you aware of any communications from the pilot?
No, I'm not.
Would his flight path into L.A. normally have taken it south towards New York, south to the west?
I can't answer that. I don't have any information on that flight path.
When did the tower here detect that there was something wrong?
Again, I don't have that specific information.
You know what time?
before it wasn't?
I don't know.
You know what time this United flight left?
I have no information on the United flight right
How
now.
unusual would it be for New York that we're heading to?
Again, I'm not familiar with the particular flight path they may have filed.
Was it a non-stop flight to Los Angeles?
I believe it was.
What time, sir, were the flights stopped in Logan? What time? What time was the airport shut down?
I believe we shut the airport down to arriving flights somewhere around 9:15, and departing flights shortly after that.
What happened to the flights that were in the air? Where are they?
They were diverted to other airports.
How long will the airport be down? How long?
Again, we're going to assess all the measures that we've taken. We want to, obviously, the safety and security of anyone who works here at the airport, any of our passengers, is a top priority.
Do you have a lot of baggage that has
That's Joe Lawless, part of the security effort at Boston's Logan Airport. A number of the planes that have been involved in this extraordinarily horrendous event today began their day in Boston. The Boston airport, like airports now across the entire country, is closed. Every airport in the country closed. International flights, as you heard Mr. Lawless say, being sent to Canada as they approach the United States. These are scenes. This is tape from the ground, and obviously this is unedited tape, so kind of bear with us. It's a little raw at this point, but this was on the ground at the around the trade center here in New York as the events began unfolding. And as you can see there, you can see that huge hole in the building of the Trade Center, both buildings standing at the time. You can see that where the plane, it almost looks like it came through the entire building.
And Aaron, we should remember what Wesley Clark told Judy Woodruff a couple of minutes ago about how much U.S. authorities have been worried about such an attack, how hard they've worked to try to fight it, how something may have gone wrong. And I believe we have on the phone right now someone who, both in fact and fiction, has dealt with justice, and that's author Tom Clancy.
Mr. Clancy, this is, I guess, a terrible case of life imitating art.
I suppose you could say that. It's a noteworthy incident. I mean, it's not the sort of thing it's the sort of thing that's best left in a novel rather than in real life. Unfortunately, one of the problems with being an author is keeping up with reality.
But Mr. Clancy, you also are very well plugged into this world. From your own knowledge, how concerned have the authorities been that something of this scale could possibly hit on American soil?
It's Jeff Greenfield, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, Jeff, you've been here to the House. I mean, it's. I had a conversation some years ago with an Air Force general about the possibility rather like this. And I ended up putting in one of my books where you go where a bad guy takes an aircraft into the Capitol building during a joint session of Congress, which could effectively decapitate the whole government. And at the time it seemed rather humorous. I said, surely you've thought about things like this. And he said, well, to the best of my knowledge, nobody in my office has looked at this, but I promise you Monday morning they will be. Presumably, they've been, they've considered this possibility for some time. The big problem is a person who's willing to lose his own life in voluntarily in a terrorist incident. The people like that are fairly rare, because self-preservation is indeed the first law of nature, and not too many people are willing to throw their lives away, and those who do it generally do it for religious reasons because they think there's something good waiting for them on the other side of death. In a case like this, that's going to lean people towards talking about, Islamic fanatics. But we need to remember that, Islam is a religion, and it's a religion with beliefs and not terribly different from Judaism or Christianity. Or they believe in a God of love and justice the same as we do, and they're not all maniacs. And religious tolerance is one of the principles of our country. We need to hold on to that principle very tightly right now, because it's the principles you hold on to when things are tough that really count.
Fair point.
This was an act by a small number of madmen, and madmen don't characterize any part of humanity.
Tom, it's Aaron Brown. When you would talk to these officials in doing the research, did they see an attack of this enormity, or were they more concerned with these sort of devastating but smaller kind of hit and miss attacks that we've seen over the last 7-8 years?
Well, you don't ordinarily expect terrorists to display this degree of expertise. Flying an airplane is not all that easy. Kidnapping or hijacking an airplane, particularly with the safeguards we have at the airports right now, is not a trivial exercise. But unfortunately, the security you have at airports is not perfect, because nothing human beings do is perfect. Somebody thought very carefully and hard and long about this, and then they got some madmen to actually take control of the aircraft.
Tom, stay with me for a second. We a few moments ago told our viewers that United Airlines was concerned about another. United lost a flight near Pittsburgh earlier today, and officials said they were also concerned about United Flight 175, Boston to Los Angeles, and now we have reports that concern was justified. A second plane has gone down, United Flight 175. Again, that was from Boston to LA. And as you look at the Pentagon, which was also hit by a plane earlier in the day. Jeff?
Yes, Tom, you were mentioning that this is such a rare act, and yet we now know of at least 4 commercial airliners that apparently were hijacked and either crashed or crashed into buildings, causing death and havoc of an unimaginable scale. So whoever is behind this is of a dimension that literally dwarfs even fantasy.
Pretty much. I dreamed pretty big with my dreams, and fortunately or unfortunately, didn't get quite this large. It's not, generally speaking, it's not credible to think that you're going to find more than one person who's willing to do something like this, because people who are willing to throw their lives away are fairly rare. In this case, they got somebody who was well organized and produced a well planned and reasonably well executed operation.
Well,
now we need to find out who it was, and then to go after him. But that's going to take time. But we do have the people to do that if they have the proper support from the executive branch of the government and from the general population of our country, to identify, locate, and deal with the people who performed this act.
The president said earlier today, shortly after the Trade Center attacks, the president characterizing these as terrorist attacks, and said that the United States government will do whatever it is necessary to hunt down those people responsible. I think it is fair to say, Tom, Jeff, all of you on the line here, it is fair to say that what we know is that this is an extraordinarily large operation, and what we don't know, in a way, is just how big it is. It seems that in each passing moment or so, we get another report of another incident, and our instinct tells us that they are all connected. We have a number of planes down, 2 American airline jets, 2 United jets down. We have a plane that hit the Pentagon. We had 2 that hit the Trade Center. You're talking about something that is, I think it's fair to say, Jeff, it is beyond anything any of us
could have imagined.
Could possibly have imagined. I think that those of us who dealt with Oklahoma City, those of us who dealt with the Trade Center here in '93, as we both did, you say, that is awful what happened. And you look at what appears to be playing out today, and we have no idea yet what the loss of life will be, certainly in the hundreds. We know that hospitals here in New York are overwhelmed with people being brought there all over the city of New York and beyond.
The only piece of news that is the least bit, I guess, reassuring is that there is no report of any kind of chemical result. That is, the folks on the ground around the World Trade Center, the rescue crews, the survivors, there is absolutely no indication at this moment that there was any kind of bioterrorism involved. Not that what happened here isn't horrific enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just add on again, small, medium-sized pieces of information as we go. All airlines in the country are closed down. All airports in the country are closed down. We now are being told that the U.S.-Mexican border has been sealed. We don't know if that is just simply part of a plan that the government puts into effect under a worst-case circumstance, this is certainly that, or if there is some specific reason why a decision was made to shut down that border. Our senior White House correspondent, John King, on the phone. John. John? John King, can you hear me? It's Aaron.
I hear you, Aaron.
What have you got to report for us?
Aaron, I'm standing across from the White House. I'm told by Secret Service and administration sources that all of the principals, all of the protectees, meaning the President, the Vice President, the First Lady, and Mrs. Cheney, are safe. They do not want us disclosing their locations, but I am told by a senior administration official that the plan and the priority is to get President Bush back to the White House as soon as they believe it is safe. Now, there are both operational and political reasons for wanting to do that. The White House Situation Room, in the view of White House officials, is the best place from which to monitor events and direct any operations. And that is a fortified structure within the White House compound where we know the Vice President was when everyone else was evacuated from the premises earlier. Again, the Secret Service does not want to confirm for us for security reasons, or administration officials the same, tell us where those people are now, although I was told a short time ago the Vice President is still in a position to be monitoring and directing the response to these developments, and that the President, who is en route back to Washington, we're told Andrews Air Force Base is on full alert. I was also told that there are extra precautions that were taken to ensure the President's flight back to Washington was a safe one. Now, you can read into that additional fighter jet escorts, Air Force One always has some escorts with it, that additional fighter jet escorts were put up for that. Now, the political reason they want to get the President back to the White House is rather obvious. The White House believes this has been a tragic terrorist attack, and they want to send the signal that the President is back on the job at the White House. Priority one, though, officials say, is to guarantee that he can be safely brought back to the White House. And in the past half hour or so, we have seen security precautions on the street, checks being taken out on the street, on the grounds around the White House. There are snipers up on the roofs of the White House itself, including buildings around it. And a military helicopter gunship flew over the premises not that long ago, about 15 minutes ago now, and then it circled back over toward the Pentagon, where from my location you can still see smoke coming into the sky from there. But we are told the Vice President is still in a position to monitor all this as the President makes his way back.
John, thank you. Our senior White House correspondent, John King. As John mentioned, the President was in Sarasota, Florida, making his way back to Washington. Whether he'll be taken directly to the White House or not is a little bit unclear. Secret Service wants to make sure the building is safe. It is, I would add, one other symbolic reason why you would want to get the President in the White House, and that's to send a message to who's ever responsible for this, that yes, you've caused extraordinary damage and a great deal of tragedy here, but what you haven't done is shut down the American government. The President will want to get home. Governor George Pataki of New York joins us on the telephone. Governor, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm here.
What are you hearing from the Trade Center area itself?
Well, we're still hearing that it's a horrific situation. We're in desperate need of people to help out with emergency services. The city team is there, but we've activated our National Guard and our statewide fire and emergency services, and we're going to be bringing those in to relieve the city forces as the afternoon goes on. I've been in touch with the mayor, I've been in touch with the White House, and everything that we can do and everything that can be done is being done at this point.
Has anyone given you any idea of how many injured we are dealing with down
Not at this point. At this point, the sole goal is to try to help as many people as possible, to get them to the emergency services, to get them the care they need, to help people who want to leave the area to leave in an orderly way, and to make sure we do everything we can to provide security throughout the city and throughout the state.
And Governor Pataki, can you tell me the degree to which the state's planning for these sorts of tragedies, and there's obviously a plan in place, and New York is, because of its place in the world, is obviously a place you have to consider a target, whether that plan envisions something of the magnitude of what has taken place this morning?
Well, you plan for any eventuality, but you never actually expect to see something of this magnitude. But we have coordinated well with the city. We're going to continue to make sure we provide all the support we can. We do have emergency services and emergency transportation running. I know the reports have been inaccurate. We do have limited rail service out of Grand Central to the northern suburbs, limited rail service out of Brooklyn and Queens to Long Island. We're working to make sure that bus service, to the extent possible, continues, and we're trying to get subway service back on track. It's not there yet, but the coordination has been excellent. It's just in an attack of this magnitude, we just have to focus on responding and helping people at this point.
And do you have any idea how many people have been hospitalized or how many hospitals are involved, whether they extend beyond the city?
Not at this point, but every emergency service, every hospital that can provide assistance is providing assistance. The people have been just terrific in their response, and we're going to continue to make sure that response is as strong as it can be.
Governor, take a moment and tell me, not as the governor necessarily, but as a resident of this state, an important player in the affairs of this state, what you're thinking today?
This is an enormous tragedy. I have friends in those towers. I have friends who were there this morning that we haven't heard from. And our thoughts go to the people who are there, to their families, to all those who are suffering at this time, and we will be there to help, and we will be there to do everything we can to make sure that the support and the services necessary are provided.
Governor, thank you. Governor George Pataki joining us here. The National Guard has been activated to support New York City Police. Andrea Koppel is on board a flight with the Secretary of State. Andrea, what are you hearing from officials there?
Well, Aaron, Secretary Powell has been in Peru since last night. He was here to attend the Organization of American States General Assembly. Obviously, when he got the news of the attacks in the United States, his aides scrambled to prepare things for him to leave. We are now, as you say, on board his plane. We're about to take off from Lima to head back to Washington. While at the OAS General Assembly, Secretary Powell said it was a terrible tragedy that had fallen on all who believe in democracy, but he said that will never kill the spirit of the American people. He also said that America will bring those responsible to justice, Aaron. There was also a minute of silence at the Organization of American States, and Secretary Powell obviously had to abruptly change his plans. He was supposed to be leaving Peru later this afternoon to head on to Colombia for his first trip there. But obviously, the attacks in the United States have changed that, and he's headed back to Washington. Aaron?
Andrea, give me a sense of the Secretary's demeanor. I mean, we know this is a man who has been through a lot in his life, has seen a lot in his life. Did he appear shaken to you?
I would say that Secretary Powell is someone who doesn't show his emotions in that way. This is a man with 35 years of military experience, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, former National Security Advisor himself, who's seen a lot in his day. And so I would say that obviously he appeared somber. very serious, but in terms of any other emotion, I would say that he's able to keep that very close to his chest.
Andrea, thank you. Andrea Koppel, flying back with the Secretary of State from South America, our colleague Judy Woodruff in Washington. Judy?
Aaron, we have joining us now on the phone from the Pentagon, our military affairs correspondent, Jamie McIntyre. Jamie, I understand you are inside the perimeter of where the commercial jetliner came down at the Pentagon. Well, it appears that we may have lost the phone connection with Jamie McIntyre. We're going to try to get that restored immediately. Jamie, are you there? Now we have Bob Franken, our Washington correspondent, joining us from the Pentagon. Bob, tell us what you are seeing there.
Well, what we're seeing, of course, in back of me is the smoke that's coming from the west side of the Pentagon, where, as we now know, a plane which is believed to have been a jumbo jet crashed into the Pentagon. It has left a hole. There was a collapse of that side of the building. You're seeing the smoke, of course, to my rear. We're reporting from an east side vantage point along a highway that's a major artery here. It is also a place where there has been a constant alert looking skyward, repeated concerns that another plane was heading this way up toward the Potomac. These have been concerns that have been out there for a couple of hours. None of them have been realized yet. Of course, the tragedy was that about 9:20 this morning Eastern time, that plane crashed into the west side of the Pentagon. You can see overhead frequently helicopters that are circling the area, of course, looking to provide some visual sighting in case anybody, any sort of invader, anything like that, wants to take to the air. It's interesting, these helicopters also will hover on the ground. There are any number of highways here, and they would be looking for suspicious vehicles, that type of thing. We are told there are casualties at the Pentagon. We have not been able to get an accurate figure. We are not exactly sure at the moment of the whereabouts of the Secretary of Defense, but the building has virtually been evacuated, if not totally evacuated. There is heavy security there, investigations going on as they try and find out what happened. We constantly see sirens and hear sirens and see ambulances go by, many of them from Walter Reed Military Hospital on the other side of Washington, clearly going in there to help with whatever casualties there are. We also have seen a couple of times F-16s, at least one F-16 flying overhead a couple of times. That was reported as to be the case of the Pentagon scrambling fighter jets in case another plane was heading this way. But as I said, right now, there has been no evidence of another plane coming this way. They're on full alert, of course, and trying to now recover from the severe damage that hit the other side of the building. Judy?
All right, Bob Franken, I just want to remind our viewers that the section of the Pentagon that was hit was between the 4th, 5th, and 6th corridors. This confirmed apparently a little earlier today by Wesley Clark, General Clark, a former NATO chief. He said from what he could tell, it appears this was the Army section of the Pentagon, planning and logistics area where certainly Army leaders would have been working in their offices. I want to read for you now a statement from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, quoting, "We are outraged at this cowardly attack on the people of the United States. Our heartfelt prayers are with the victims and their families, and we stand strongly united behind the President as our Commander-in-Chief." And I want to clarify that this is a statement by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I want to clarify that this is from the leadership of the Congress. I misunderstood when I was handed this just a moment ago. And continuing, congressional leaders, we will work with the President to ensure that the full resources of the United States government are brought to bear to protect the American people and to punish the perpetrators of these unconscionable acts. May God bless America. And just quickly, before I go back to Aaron Brown in New York, hospitals in Washington dealing with the casualties from the Pentagon Washington Hospital Center, 29 patients, a blood shortage, we are being told, in Washington. So any of you who are able to get to a hospital anywhere in the Washington area, it is very possible that there is a need for blood to be donated. So we will just put that information out there as well. Aaron, now back to you in New York.
Judy, thanks. We now are being told that Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, has been evacuated. Again, this is another one of those multi-terminal airports. It's an enormous airport, and that is being evacuated. At least one of the flights, perhaps two if memory serves me, that has gone down today was headed towards Los Angeles, one towards San Francisco. We also have a report that Disney World in Orlando has been evacuated. Someone said to me a moment ago, before the day is over, everything's going to be shut down. And that seems to be where we're headed. CNN's Richard Roth is on the streets of New York, and he can join us now. Richard, what can you tell us?
Aaron, New Yorkers think they've seen everything, but they'll say they're amazed at what has happened, stunned. Right now behind me, what normally would be the World Trade Center is no more, a huge cloud of white smoke. And right now it's like a war zone. Thousands of New Yorkers streaming north. The mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani, has told everyone to get north of Canal Street. We're several miles north of it. Right now, New Yorkers are trying to get out of Manhattan. There's a ferry on the west side going to New Jersey. It's really the only access out. The mayor advising that people should take the subways. We have seen dozens of emergency vehicles, hundreds. Firemen being bussed in, decontamination vans coming in, call for blood donations. New Yorkers, their faces, their expressions, stunned, amazed right now. With us, several of those people who witnessed some of the carnage today. Tell us what you saw when you exited the subway station due to a lack of smoke. Eileen.
It was very smoky, and then we exited on Church Street out of the PATH train station. I crossed over to Church and Fulton, and I was trying to get a cell phone. I was trying to get up the block, and I turned around and saw this tremendous fire. I actually thought it was a bomb. I couldn't see a plane, and I saw people jumping off the building. Many people just jumping. And in a panic, I had my bag and my cell phone and everything, and I was trying to find a phone because the cell phone wasn't working. Everybody was screaming, everybody was running, the cops were trying to maintain the calm, and in that haste, people were stampeding. People started screaming that there was another plane coming. I didn't see the plane, but I turned around, and the second building just exploded. And again, all the debris was flying towards us. There was a woman on the ground with her baby. People were stampeding the baby. Myself and another man threw ourselves over the baby and pushed into the building. I got up and I just ran, and I ran towards City Hall, and I said, oh God, why am I running there? And then I started to run towards the water. And then I was by probably Spring Street Prince Street. I was at a payphone, and I heard the rumbling. I thought it was another bomb. I thought it was another building close to me. And then I just ran from the payphone. The man is grabbing me back, telling me to stay here, you're safe. I was like, no way, I'm getting out of here, go north. And then I ran into a shoe store because I wanted to call my husband. That's all I wanted to do was let him know I was alive, because he knew I was in the World Trade. And I got my office, and they connected me to my husband, and then we heard the second fall of the World Trade Center. And I'm astonished by the bombing. I just want to make a statement that these New York policemen and firemen, God bless them, they kept us calm. They tried so hard to keep us moving north, and it was just absolute horror. It was horror.
We're breaking briefly into our CNN coverage once again. In Australia, the visiting former US President Bill Clinton is getting ready to address a press conference. That's in Port Douglas, and we hope to bring it to you as soon as it happens. And first, authorities in the United States. Security around the world is being stepped up in the wake of the suspected terrorist attacks in the United States. Italian airports are running on maximum security. A crisis meeting is underway in Germany to coordinate security measures there. And in Canada, all flights, except those required for humanitarian purposes, have been cancelled. In Russia, President Boris Yeltsin said the attacks were terrible tragedies. And in a nationally televised address, French President Jacques Chirac described them as monstrous. Jordan has condemned the terrorist attacks and expressed its condolences to President Bush for the loss of innocent lives. But in Nablus, in the West Bank, around 2,000 Palestinians celebrated, reportedly in honour of suspected terrorist Osama bin Laden, the man held responsible by the United States for the attacks on 2 American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania 3 years ago. Meanwhile, a senior official with the radical Islamic Jihad movement said the attacks were part of a consequence, or were the consequence, of United States policy in the Middle East. In London, the British Prime Minister Tony Blair has summoned his senior cabinet ministers for an emergency security meeting. Mr. Blair says he's terribly shocked by the attacks.
This mass terrorism is the new evil in our world today. It is perpetrated by fanatics who are utterly indifferent to the sanctity of human life. And we, the democracies of this world, are going to have to come together to fight it together and eradicate this evil completely from our world.
We'll now repeat the special hotline number for people, Australians that is, worried about friends and family in the United States. The hotline set up by the Department of Foreign Affairs is 1300 555 135. That number again is 1300 555 135. And Telstra advises that exchanges in North America are jammed, and the 1300 number is the best chance for getting updated information about Australians in the United States. Well, we'll bring you the press conference by the former US President Bill Clinton in Port Douglas as soon as it takes place. But in the meantime, we'll return you to our CNN coverage.
Hear from Lieutenant Howard Whitehead of the Los Angeles Airport Police as to the status here at LAX.
Because we work with other agencies who are conducting closures outside of the airport, I can't get information right now.
3 flights were bound for Los Angeles that appear to have been involved today. What accommodations are being made for the friends and family of passengers?
That's being handled by the airlines. They're having a meeting now concerning that, so that information has to get from the airlines.
So officially, what are you starting at this point?
We're starting a total evacuation of the airport.
Will that include both workers and passengers?
Only key employees will remain at the airport.
This is the entire airport that will be evacuated?
Yes, ma'am.
Why
the
evacuation?
Because the evacuation has been ordered. I can't tell you why, but that's what that's how it stands now.
Threat to the airport?
It's precautionary at this point.
Have you ever seen anything like this before in Los Angeles?
Not to my knowledge, no.
And what is going to be your role, the police department's role in this? What are you doing?
We're protecting the public. That's what our job is.
Will roads in and out of the airport be closed as well? Will people be able to get into the airport?
Right now, this thing is fluid. We're working as we go with the changes, so I couldn't give you a definite on anything right now.
How many police officers more or less
Thanks very much.
here in the airport on a regular day?
Other agencies involved, I couldn't give you an exact figure.
Right now, there are other agencies?
Yes, ma'am. That's all I have for right now. Thank you. My name is Lieutenant Whitehead.
So this is what you're listening.
That was Lieutenant Howard Whitehead of the LAX Police telling us again that just within the last 15 or 20 minutes, an order has come down, a command decision to close, to evacuate the terminals at LAX. Up until this point, of course, flights were not being allowed in or out. Now they are evacuating all the terminals except for key personnel. Also here with me now is Lieutenant Colonel Al Van Cleef of the Salvation Army. You have the very difficult task of helping to coordinate the grief counseling. Can you tell me about the accommodations that are being made for family members of Flight 11, 77, and 175?
We have 6 grief counselors on site now, 2 of the teams ready. We're waiting word now from American Airlines. They are diligently working on the plans as far as a private location where the family will be received. As soon as we're aware of that, then they will make contact with us so our counselors can proceed to where family members will be arriving. We've done the same thing here in Los Angeles as well as San Francisco and Washington, D.C.
Very difficult day for you, sir. Thanks very much for joining us. That is the latest from Los Angeles. Aaron, back to you.
Frank, thank you. Frank Buckley in Los Angeles. We are in the midst of extraordinary national tragedy, attacks in Washington and New York, attacks on airliners, the dimensions of which are not yet clear, but what is clear is that this is a day unlike any other. The worst fears of officials around the country, security, intelligence, military officials, political leaders, worst fears being realized, being played out in New York and Washington, 80 miles outside of Pittsburgh where a plane went down. Other planes have crashed. We don't know the circumstances precisely. We now have a report perhaps of another building here in New York that has collapsed. CNN producer Rose Arce is on the phone. Rose, what can you tell us?
Yes, there's another building very close to the World Trade Center that was hit by debris some time ago, and it appears to be on the verge of collapse. Also, that enormous plume of smoke that you see that's surrounding the building, there are suspicions that it's not all smoke, but that there's a gas leak within that smoke. And that has caused a tremendous amount of panic in this area. The police have been saying that they're now evacuating all of lower Manhattan, and you can see people moving north in a flood through these streets. They're just filled with ash. You know, as you walk through the ash, you can see debris from inside the World Trade Center itself, a very, very eerie scene, pieces of paper from people's desks, office supplies, many, many blocks from the site of the actual explosion, where they now are fearing that there may be yet another explosion because of this potential gas leak.
Rose, thank you. Rose Arce, who's on the streets of Manhattan. Back to Jerry Hauer, who who ran the mayor's emergency response team, and I'm not sure I got the title right, but the essence is correct. When you all, after the '93 attack on the buildings, and you sat down and tried to redo a plan, which I assume happened, did you anticipate anything of this magnitude?
Well, we have plans in place in New York City for massive incidents, but an incident like this is very difficult to plan for, just because of the number of people that have been the number of responders that have been injured. Are literally hundreds of people coming from New Jersey. As you heard from the governor early, the National Guard will be activated to help with the law enforcement to help seal the area. I know that FEMA will be activating their search and rescue teams to assist with going through the debris. This is going to be a long-term operation. It is going to be a very difficult one because, as you heard earlier, there's still a gas leak in the building, which is fueling this fire. And until the gas is turned off, that fire could burn for some time.
Stay with us, Jerry. Back to Washington. CNN's Judy Woodruff. Judy, you have more here. What can you tell us?
Well, Aaron, we are monitoring, of course, statements from around the globe, and we've just, in the last few minutes, been able to get a statement from the Taliban ambassador to Pakistan. The Taliban, of course, being the religious organization that is the party controlling the government in Afghanistan. The name Mullah Abdul Salam Zaif said in reaction to the news of these terror attacks in the United States, and I am quoting, "We want to tell the American children that Afghanistan feels your pain, and we hope that the courts find justice." Now, this statement, again, made by a Taliban ambassador to Pakistan, his name, Mullah Abdul Salam Zaif, he made it at a news conference in Islamabad. And I would just add that we're told that at the top of the hour, which would be perhaps 1 o'clock Eastern time, we're expecting a news conference live from Kabul, Afghanistan. That is the capital of Afghanistan, the Taliban being the controlling religious party in that country, Afghanistan being the country where we have every reason to believe Osama bin Laden, the leader of a huge terrorist network, continues to live in hiding. The Taliban has denied his presence there from time to time, but it is believed by those who follow the activities of his organization that he is in Afghanistan. So we will, of course, be watching that. Let me just... All right, Aaron, I want to go back to you now in New York.
Thank you, Judy. We have on the phone with us New York's Mayor, Rudy Giuliani. Mr. Mayor, give us your best piece of information as the situation right now.
The situation right now is a massive rescue effort that's going on right now. We're trying to evacuate thousands and thousands of people. We have as many of our police and fire personnel as we have down in the southern part of Manhattan, evacuating people, trying to save as many lives as possible. We've been in communication with Governor Pataki, who's gotten the National Guard ready, and they're going to come in and relieve us a little bit later in the day. And we've spoken to the White House, and the urban search and rescue teams will come here also to assist us. But right now, it's the New York City Police and Fire, EMS, that are down there trying to evacuate as many people as we possibly can. And we've asked everyone to leave Lower Manhattan if they can on their own so that it relieves our efforts. And this will be going on all day. It's a horrible, horrible tragedy.
It is that. Mr. Mayor, can you tell me, is it a... Are people panicking down there? Or
no,
are they
people.
leaving?
I was, I was there right in a building that got hit by the debris when the first tower collapsed. So I had to evacuate with people, and we were trapped in the building for a while. And we finally were able to get out, and we all walked north, and people everything that I observed, even though it was hundreds, maybe in some cases thousands of people that were walking down the street, they were orderly, they were calm, they handled themselves really probably better than anybody had any right to expect.
And Mr. Mayor, we were told one of the problems, and Lord knows there are hundreds of problems, one of the problems was that a large number of police, fire, EMS personnel have also been injured in this. Can you shed any light on that?
I don't even want to contemplate what the number will be. But when the building collapsed, we had a lot of our police officers and firefighters in the building, and I know many of them because I saw some of them go in because I was there, and I'm praying for them. I just hope they're able to get out.
I think we all
the losses to our police department and fire department.
Sir,
I believe are going to be severe.
Do you believe that was there another set of explosions that caused the buildings to collapse, or was it the structural damage caused by the planes?
I don't know. I saw the first collapse and heard the second because I was in a building when the second took place. I think it was structural, but I cannot be sure.
And can you tell us how many hospitals in the city and perhaps outside the city too? All of them.
Right now, at last count, we were utilizing over 50. I think it'll be over 100 by the. And that was as of a half hour ago. And utilizing all of the hospitals in New York City. We're utilizing the hospitals in Westchester and Rockland, Nassau County, northern New Jersey. And the main thing we have to urge people to do is to be calm and evacuate Lower Manhattan. And as far as the rest of the city is concerned, just to go about their lives as best as possible. I never thought I would see something like this happen. I got there after the first plane hit and before the second, and watching people jump from the top of the World Trade Center is an unbelievable sight.
Mr. Mayor, my colleague Jeff Greenfield is with us also. Jeff?
Mr. Mayor, in terms of, you've already said that you want Lower Manhattan evacuated, you want everybody else to go about their business. Are there specific instructions that you want to communicate right now to police, fire, everybody else?
Well, police and fire are there, and they're there in large numbers, and they are, first of all, trying to get into the rubble and the debris to save as many people as possible. We also have thousands of police officers in Lower Manhattan, and what we want people to do is to leave Lower Manhattan if they can on their own. Just to walk.
Sorry.
I just talked to Dick Grasso, who runs the stock exchange, and we have a lot of police there. They have 3,000 people there. We're going to walk them out. We're walking them east and then north, which is essentially the way I walked out. I was right below the World Trade Center when it collapsed, and then we walked up to Greenwich Village. People should walk out of Lower Manhattan, get above Canal Street, for safety reasons, but for a second reason. We need people out of there so we can get thousands of ambulances in and out over the course of the next couple hours. And the fewer people we have there, the more lives we're going to be able to save.
Mr. Mayor, are the subways operating?
The subways are operating outside of Manhattan. Outside of Manhattan, the subways are operating. A couple of delays here and there, but in all other four boroughs, the subways are operating. In Manhattan, there are significant delays. We thought we had the Lexington Avenue open, but it is not. I'm just checking right now. The Lexington Avenue is not open. The A train is working, and people will just have to test and see. The best thing to do right now is to walk. The safest and best thing to do is to walk to your destination. Where schools have remained open, and we've worked with the chancellor to try to make certain that the schools will remain open for as long as they have to help parents with the kids that would be coming home, starting at around 1 or 2 o'clock.
Mr. Mayor, as you know better than anyone, and certainly New Yorkers know, but people around the country perhaps do not. This was Election Day here. What is the status of the election?
We canceled it. The governor and I decided about an hour and a half ago that it made no sense to have an election today. We needed all those police officers who were at the election site, and we need to focus on rescue. So we'll find another day. We'll find another day for the election. The governor and I made that decision about an hour and a half ago.
Mr. Mayor, you're a very focused guy in moments like this. Is it hard, given the magnitude of what's happened here and around the country, to focus on what you have to do and not just be angry?
It's very hard, and it's very hard because I know some of the people that are there. They're personal friends and close friends who are in the building, and I haven't been able to find out if they're safe yet.
Your emergency command center, what some people have called a bunker, was located, was it not, in one of the World Trade Center buildings?
It was located close enough to it so that it was affected by it. It's not in one of the buildings, but it was located right in that area, as is City Hall, the police department, and all of them had to be evacuated. So that area of Manhattan, once I was in a building at the time that we were using as a command center, and we were trapped in the building for a while, for about 20 minutes, not able to get out different exits that were overcome with smoke and debris.
Mr. Mayor, just as a practical question, do hospitals need help? Do they need
hospitals need all of the help they can get. We're getting a great deal of help from the surrounding areas. The governor has mobilized the state in order to make hospitals available to us outside of Manhattan. Any hospital personnel or emergency personnel that want to come in and volunteer, that'd be enormously helpful. But the best thing for us to do right now, we're trying to coordinate, is to move people out of the city to hospitals in surrounding areas, which we're actually doing now. But so far, though, our hospital system is we're very fortunate to have a gigantic hospital system.
Do they have enough blood? Do they need blood? Do they need people to come in and help them out?
I'm sure they will. We're getting the National Guard to relieve our people by early to late this afternoon. They're being mobilized now. And 3 urban search and rescue teams are going to come to New York City to help us. And then anyone that wants to volunteer from surrounding areas, volunteer fire departments and others, we're working with them now to do that, to try to relieve our fire department.
It's a horrific day, Mr. Mayor.
There's no possible way to begin to describe it.
No, there is not.
To see what happened there is, of course, it makes you very, very angry. It's almost impossible to describe the level of anger that you have that somebody or someone would do something like this. And all of the good and wonderful people that were affected by this. There's no reason for this. There's no excuse for this. And there's something like this is just something you never thought you would live to see.
I couldn't agree more, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
New York's Mayor Rudy Giuliani on what was to be an election day. The mayor not up for re-election because of term limits, but the election has been postponed. Jeff, I just step back for a second.
Well, that's
you talk about anger. And we stand up here and we look at this, and we've all listened to what's been going on now as we've been on the air for 3 hours or so. And there was a woman that Richard Roth interviewed about a half hour ago who said what I suspect that most Americans are feeling right now, and some would like to say and can't, how angry she was, how cowardly this all seemed to her. Quickly, we go back to Washington and Judy Woodruff. Judy?
Aaron, government sources telling CNN that President Bush, who had been in Florida for a 2-day trip and who broke that trip off this morning to head back to Washington, will now not return to Washington. Repeating, President Bush will not return to Washington. We do not know where the president will land or whether where his aircraft will go, Air Force One, but we just are passing along this information just as soon as we have it. Again, as we were talking to former NATO head Wesley Clark, General Wesley Clark, a little while ago, he pointed out that there are contingency plans that the military and the security people have for the president in a situation like this, and we're not going to do any speculating right here about where the president might be going. Joining us now on the telephone, there is some information we want to share with you about aircraft in the sky that is, we're told, is safe right now. We're told by the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, they're telling us 50 aircraft are safely in the sky right now, all within about 50 miles of their destination. But in the meantime, we want to talk to Utah Republican Senator Orrin Hatch, who's joining us on the telephones. Senator Hatch, are you there?
Yes, I am.
And I know my colleague Wolf Blitzer, who's here with me in the studio in Washington, had also talked with you. Senator, you've been briefed by what authorities?
Well, I'm on both the Judiciary Committee and also the Intelligence Committee, and I've been briefed by the highest levels of the FBI and of the and of the intelligence community. And I just have to say our thoughts and prayers go out to the victims of this terrible tragedy caused by a bunch of cowards. And there's no justification for what these cowards have done to purely innocent Americans, but I do have some information.
Senator Hatch, this is Wolf Blitzer. Tell us, I spoke with you earlier on the telephone, but tell us precisely what you are now being told in these high-level briefings about those who may, and repeat the word may, have been responsible for these attacks.
You're right. They've come to the conclusion that this looks like the signature of Osama bin Laden and that he may be the one behind this. I think most authorities agree that this is something that we doubt seriously if Iran, Iraq, or Libya would try and do, because they know of the massive response that we'd have to bring down on them. But there was no advance notice at all. They had no way of knowing that this was going to happen. It was carefully planned. And what it means is it seems to me that if that turns out to be true, we're going to have to revitalize Shah Massoud and the other people in Afghanistan who basically are fighting to get rid of this type of terrorism. And I think we're going to have to ask our friends in Pakistan to get, in turn, to be more cooperative than they have in the past. And then we'd have to work with our allies to have an international strategy to combat this type of international jihad against the West.
We're listening to Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah. We also have joining us on the telephone Senator John McCain from his home in Arizona. Senator McCain, I assume you've been talking to authorities as well.
Yes, Judy, and I'm on Capitol Hill in Washington.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks for clarifying.
Yes. The situation is so serious that words don't describe it. I think that it's clear that the organization and magnitude of the attacks required more than a few people to perpetrate it, and it'll take some time to determine who they are and who supported these attacks, but I think we'll find them out, and they will suffer the full measure of our justice. This is obviously an act of war that's been committed on the United States of America.
What do you mean, obviously, an act of war, Senator McCain?
These attacks clearly constitute an act of war. The unwarranted, unprovoked attacks against innocent American citizens is clearly an act of war, and one that requires that kind of national response and international response.
Senator Orrin Hatch, I believe, is also still with us, Senator. And Senator Hatch, you mentioned the bin Laden organization. Former NATO head General Wesley Clark also said to us about an hour ago in an interview that he believes that it's only the bin Laden organization that is capable of carrying out attacks this coordinated and on this massive a scale. What are you basing your information on?
Well, keep in mind, there are nations that also could carry out these attacks, but I don't think would dare do that, knowing that their signature is going to be figured out. We're going to find out who did this, and we're going after the bastards. It's that simple. And I just have to say that both the FBI and our intelligence community believe that this is a bin Laden signature. And I believe it is. I was the first to point out bin Laden to the Clinton administration and said they're going to kill Americans, and we've got to get on top of that. And I think we're going to have to get on top of it, because this is a cowardly bunch who will stop at nothing to, like you say, have a jihad or a war against the United States, and to do it in the most cowardly fashion.
But Senator McCain, I mean, there will be those who are saying the United States was taking all reasonable precautions. We had security at airports, metal detectors, and so forth and so on. How much more is going to have to be done to prevent something like these things from happening again?
Judy, I don't think our lifestyles will be the same for a long time, since it was before these attacks, as far as use of transportation, particularly airports, are concerned. There have been warnings about whether our security was good enough and whether the proper measures were being taken. I'm sure that'll all be reviewed. By the way, I have no information as to who caused this, and I hesitate to speculate, but I am confident that the President of the United States will lead us, and we will find out who has carried out these acts. And I think it's a little premature to to make that determination until we have the hard facts, but I'm sure that we'll get them. The other aspect of this is that it may highlight over time the need for more human intelligence. We have very good technical intelligence capabilities, satellites, etc., but for many years we haven't had the kind of human intelligence which determines motivations before actions are taken.
I'm going to interrupt you, Senator McCain. These are the first pictures we have in. This is from Somerset County, Pennsylvania. This is where the United Airlines flight, I believe it is 176, went down. I'm sorry, I'm correcting. United Airlines 93. This was a Boeing 757 bound from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco. It crashed in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, near the town of Shanksville, south of Pittsburgh. We're told about 80 miles outside of Pittsburgh in western Pennsylvania. It is not known how many passengers.
And we're breaking into our CNN coverage once again. We will come back to it. As the United States reels from the effects of the terrorist attacks and many of the world's nations express their shock, the reaction among some Palestinians has been one of jubilation. In Nablus, as we reported earlier, in the West Bank, around 2,000 Palestinians celebrated the attacks, a shop owner handing out cake to mark the occasion. The Palestinian refugees are reportedly celebrating the honour of suspected terrorist Osama bin Laden, the man held responsible by the United States for the bombings on 2 American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania 3 years ago. But in Afghanistan, the hardline Taliban rulers have rejected suggestions Osama bin Laden may have been behind the attacks in New York and have condemned the action. Now, I'm joined on the phone now by our Middle East correspondent, Tim Palmer, who's in Jerusalem. Tim, extraordinary news, really, that some Palestinians would be celebrating at this time.
It was unfortunately expected. It's not known what representation that is of the Palestinian population on the whole. Most people here are as shocked as everyone else in the world at that. But these scenes will resonate through the peace process if, as Islamic Jihad has said, this attack, whoever conducted it, is the result of American policies in the Middle East over the past months. Certainly those American policies are going to be influenced by pictures of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon shooting into the air to celebrate, and of Palestinians in various West Bank towns and even in East Jerusalem celebrating on the streets. Despite that, you have probably seen Yasser Arafat making a statement from Gaza in which he described it as a terrible act. He said he was completely shocked, and if you had seen it, you could see that he was clearly physically shocked by this incident. We've also had various Palestinian factions denying their involvement. There was initially a suggestion by one of the Gulf television stations that the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, based in Damascus these days, a faction of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, had claimed responsibility. Officials in Damascus and in Ramallah in the West Bank have since denied that. Likewise, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, another dissident faction, the PLO, have denied their involvement. They were under some suspicion because after the recent assassination of their leader in the West Bank, some members of that faction had said American targets would be next.
Now, Tim, obviously those groups are small and in many cases fractured, and it'd be hard to imagine that any of them could do something on such a scale. Do you know of any group in the Middle East which would be capable of this?
There is, of course, one group that so many fingers are pointing at from the United States. They sprang from the Middle East. They are now, of course, based in Afghanistan in hiding, the group of Osama bin Laden, the Saudi millionaire, from a renegade from one of the wealthiest Saudi families. He has contacts through the region from Sudan through to Afghanistan. Just around 9 months ago, American officials say they thwarted a major terrorist plot by the bin Laden group against targets in Jordan and in the West Bank and Israel at a time of high tourism, when it was thought that they were going to target tourist sites, particularly attacking Americans. Many of those people have appeared in courts in Jordan. This is the kind of highly organised, more sophisticated attack that the bin Laden group has been known for. That's why the suspicion is directed their way.
Well, certainly the FBI and the intelligence community, it's reported in the United States, thinks this is the bin Laden signature. But it still is an extraordinary level of organisation. I mean, it seems the level of organisation you might only expect from a country.
Look, some say that bin Laden is acting like a mini-state within Afghanistan at this stage. People are being trained at terror camps in Afghanistan from around the world. We've seen recently people even trained from Britain. There are suggestions that American citizens have been trained at bin Laden camps in Afghanistan. This is the reason why sanctions have been imposed on Afghanistan, why in the past the United States targeted cruise missiles at the country. The bin Laden organisation has been largely impervious to that. It appears they've only strengthened. This could be the sign that they have launched their great attack that so many have feared.
Well, just a few moments ago, Senator John McCain in the United States was referring to this as an act of war that will require an international response. Now, unfortunately, working out who to attack and where is going to be their hardest problem, but we can expect, obviously, the United States to respond with force.
This is precisely the problem that highly developed, very powerful nations face. They face this kind of attack, not a direct war from these forces, because they have such overwhelming power. And yet, despite being able to, the Americans could win any war, any regional war on the planet, they could be expected to win. But they cannot fight, necessarily, a war like this. How do they target at this stage bin Laden in Afghanistan, despite the rhetoric? Sanctions are already in place. Attacks have been made using missiles against them. Still, they remain strong. I should point out that there are other ramifications in this region that we're seeing already. For your information, oil prices have surged over $30 a barrel within a couple of hours here. And just to give you a local perspective also on the security situation, all flights into Israel that don't have security clearance, and that essentially means any flights that aren't the national carrier El Al, are being turned away and cannot come to Israel. So Israel is, at this point, to some extent, sealing itself off from the outside world, fearing that it could be the next target.
How are the Israelis behaving in other respects? I mean, how are they behaving towards Palestinians on the West Bank and in the other occupied territories?
There's really no change in context.
Formerly occupied territories.
Yes, I think people are glued to their televisions here. Meanwhile, a mini-war is still being played out here. The conflict hasn't abated while this has gone on. In Jenin, where Israeli tanks overnight surrounded the town, there is a serious battle has been raging all day. Tanks have moved a short distance into the city and have fired shells into the city, killing 2 people and injuring 8. Another man's been killed in Gaza. This at a time when tonight, supposedly, Shimon Peres, Israel's foreign minister, and Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat were meant to meet. That, of course, has gone by the by in any case because of the localised conflict here. The scenes of Palestinians celebrating in the street will only enshrine in many Israelis' hearts that this is a battle that cannot be won anyway except through force, that there is no room for negotiation. That unfortunately will be the upshot here and possibly in America, where American mediation is so needed. To the scenes that have been seen in the streets in Palestinian cities.
Tim Palmer, very briefly, no one has actually mentioned another name, Saddam Hussein and Iraq. Is there a reason for that?
In fact, in this region there has been some discussion, but really people are casting around to anyone. I mean, we've even had the Japanese Red Army supposedly have made a claim through one media organisation that they're responsible. Now, the Japanese Red Army has hardly been involved in any actions, although since a successful one many years ago here in Tel Aviv. When I say successful, tragically, they opened fire and threw grenades in the airport here, killing a number of people. But it's unlikely that this is a serious claim. At this stage, people are casting around, but there is no doubt that the focus is falling on the Middle East and the offspring of the Middle East in Afghanistan.
OK, Tim Palmer, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much for joining us. And now for some news just in from Washington. The Sydney Morning Herald correspondent Michelle Grattan, who is in Washington with the Howard delegation, says the Australian delegation to the United States, including the Prime Minister John Howard, has moved from its hotel to the basement in the Australian Embassy building for greater security. Meanwhile, the United States Federal Aviation Administration has confirmed that 4 commercial flights, that's 2 United Airlines planes and 2 American Airlines planes, are missing, believed to have been involved in the attacks. And here again is the hotline number for people concerned about friends and family in the United States. The number has been set up by the Department of Foreign Affairs, and it is 1300 555 135. That number again is 1300 555 135. And Telstra advises that the 1300 number is the best chance for getting updated information about Australians in the United States, because phone exchanges in the US are currently experiencing difficulty, not surprisingly. And we were hoping to bring you an address by the visiting former US President Bill Clinton live from Port Douglas, but lack of available transmission equipment in Port Douglas prevents us from doing so. And we, I believe, have just received word that there is going to be a press conference. I think we may be able to cross to that press conference with the Taliban actually in Kabul. We'll move to that now.
And you are now criticizing on the fact. Terrorism, your own care, on the fact terrorism is a terrifying and hateful hatred or hateful method. او دغه پیښه چې سوي د بشري پلوه خورا پراخه او لوی ناورین دی. And this incident is from the humanitarian point of view surely a very vast and very terrifying incident. Any question? Any question?
Question, please. Have you received any kind of information, any kind of communication from the United States or any other organization?
The American ایالاتي یا لومړی قانون کوم رابطه درسره شوې ده؟ نه تر اوسه پورې چا کومه رابطه نه ده کړې. ولې اوس تر ټولو مهمه خبره ده چې هغوی په ژغورنه باندې اخته دي. کېدای شي چې یوازې هغوی ته د تسلیت پیغامونه تللي وي او دا چې اسلامي امارت سره چا تماس نیولی دا خبر تر اوسه پورې نه. No contact up to now. They might be busy or surely they are busy in the rescue operation. So they need condolence, but up to now, no communication from them.
Does the Taliban categorically condemn these attacks on the United States?
Taliban په مرحله‌واره توګه په امریکا باندې دغه حملې وکړي. موږ د توریزم ټول انواع همیشه غندلې د پخوا څخه په دې باره کې پالیسي شته وه. Our policy was very clear from the very beginning, and we have criticized, and even now we criticize terrorism in all its forms.
Can you rule out any involvement by Osama bin Laden?
Osama bin Laden لاسو هیڅ قسم ته یا کوم یو قسم ته لاسو لودنه تشکیل راوړي. تر اوسه پورې چې هغه باندې رسمي تور هم نه دی لګولې. No, up till now, no one has blamed or accused him formally.
The Taliban have said that they will maintain Mr. bin Laden without communication, unable to communicate. Can you be convinced at this time that your policy of keeping him without communication has been effective in recent months?
طالبان ژمنه کړې وه چې اسامه بن لادن سره به هر قسم ته اتصالاتي امکانات به لري کړي. تاسو دا خبره تاییدوئ چې اوس هم هغه پالیسي په دې باندې عملي ده؟ موږ په پالیسۍ کې کوم تغیر نه و راغلی. No change in our policy in this regard.
Do you think the policy is working, Mr. Mutwakiel?
او دا پالیسي کار هم کوي. اثر یې کړی دی؟ که دې خبره ده.
Suspicions obviously turn to Osama bin Laden. In the media, he's been mentioned as possibly having a hand in this. Are you concerned that Afghanistan could be on the receiving end of recrimination, of reprisals, of responding back?
توجه یا ګمان دې ته راوړي مطبوعاتو یا میډیا کې د نوم هم اخیستی ده. آیا تاسو داسې ورته خوب کوئ چې افغانستان به د دې عکس العمل وویني یا د عکس العمل هدف ته وګرځي؟ زه فکر کوم که چا د هغه نوم اخیستی هم یوازې به د پخوا څخه چې چون په هغو تفسیرو کې ډېر نوم راتلی خوله مو خرڅوي. I think that even if someone has taken his name in the media, it might be just because his name was repeatedly mentioned in the past in the comments. Just for this reason, his name might have been repeated.
Just the second half of the question, though, are you concerned that Afghanistan could receive reprise attacks?
تاسو چې یو نگرانی لرئ چې افغانستان به د دې عکس العمل وویني؟ موږ کوم مشکل دی داسې نه ګورو ځکه چې کوم دلیل یې We don't see or foresee any difficulty in this regard because there is no argument or no reason for it.
if it were to happen, if there were to be attacks, what would the implications be of such a situation?
If there were attacks from,
as Jonathan said, if there were to be reprisals against Afghanistan, what would the implications of that be?
هغه به د هغه وخت سره ګورو خو ما مخکې ویل چې ټول انواع د تروریزم هغه په دولتي شکل باندې که چېرته یو هېواد بل هېواد ولید طبعا هغه دولتي تروریزم. It is a little bit earlier to say at this stage, but as we said that we criticize all forms of criticism. So if Afghanistan is attacked, then we can call it state terrorism.
There's also been concerns expressed about Arab mercenaries fighters in Afghanistan and allegations that there may be an Arab connection to these acts of terrorism have also been raised. Can you talk to those concerns? Can you rule out any Arab links?
افغانستان کې عربي اتباع یا بعض داسې ګروپونه چې له ونه دنیا خطر احساسوي تاسو د هغو لاس درلودنه په دې پیښو کې هم ردوئ؟ زه فکر کوم چې دا پیښه ډېره لو پیښه ده او دا به داسې چا پسې مسؤول چې زړه ته ونه لوېږي چې دا کار وکړي دا به کېدای شي چې یو ناانصافي وي یو څوم تخمین ونی. It is a very big and enormous incident. So just to connect it with some people that even one's logic cannot even accept it. So in my opinion, it might not be a justifying.
Mr. Madhugill, are you surprised that the United States has received this sort of attack?
د امریکا متحده ایالاتو چې د داسې حملاتو هدف وګرځېد تاسو دې باندې حیران شوي یاستئ؟ د دې خبر ده چې د خپل نوې دا پیښه کېدای شي د امریکا په تاریخ کې ډېره لویه پیښه وي د هر چا لپاره طبیعي خبر د حیرانۍ وړ ده. Naturally, because this might be the only and the unique kind of incident in the history of the United States. So, like anyone is also.
What I'm getting at is do you think the United States has perhaps invited this, given its policy around the world and the growing resentment that some forces feel towards the United States? So what I'm suggesting is that the United States is
it's a Taliban official in Kabul. The relevance here, of course, is that the United States government has blamed the Afghani government for harboring Osama bin Laden, who may or may not be responsible for the events that have happened here in the country today, and therefore the Taliban response. The president, who was in Sarasota, Florida, when President Bush, when the first attack on the Trade Center took place, issued a statement then. He left Sarasota. He is not going back to the White House, at least not yet, but he has told reporters, quote, "We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Make no mistake," said the president, "the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts." The president said the U.S. military has been put on a high alert status and said he had taken security precautions to ensure the government continues to function. And as we said, the president at this moment is not going back to Washington. He has been taken elsewhere for his own safety. There is no reason, by the way, at this point to believe there are continuing threats, but that doesn't mean there aren't any, and the Secret Service is taking no chances, and we can't recall anything even approaching that. We also have a report coming out of London from the Associated Press that followers of Osama bin Laden had warned 3 weeks ago that they would carry out a huge and unprecedented attack on U.S. interests. That, according to a London-based Arab journalist, he adds, they said it would be huge and unprecedented, but did not specify what it was, and we will not assume that this is what it was, but obviously a lot of people are wondering. Joining us on the phone, Richard Holbrooke, former American ambassador to the United Nations, Robert Gates, former head of the CIA, and they join us. Mr. Gates, let me start with you because I suspect that millions of Americans right now are asking, how could something like this happen? How could it happen?
I think we have to start by acknowledging that we've been
both fortunate and capable in the past. This is not the first major attack like this that has been planned. Several years ago, there was a plot to bring down 11 American jumbo jets in Asia that the FBI and U.S. intelligence thwarted, and there have been some other major attacks. So I think that when you have a free and open country as we do, we are vulnerable to this sort of thing, and it is the face of this term that people have been talking about for several years of asymmetric warfare, and it is a way of getting at us, the most powerful military nation in the world, in ways in which we're vulnerable.
Sir, we heard, and perhaps it's given our proximity to the events, it's a little bit unseemly, but we heard a member of Congress but a few minutes ago essentially say that the American government failed its people. Is it fair to say that this is a failure, or we just can't know it all?
Well, personally, I believe that for people to start blaming people and organizations at this point is highly premature. I think that we need to find out just exactly how bad this situation is and deal with it. The idea of starting to cast blame within hours of something having happened is in fact unseemly.
And Ambassador Holbrooke,